Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Foundation Cracks. Dominic Russo believed in the sanctity of family above all else. At 42, the former Marine Force recon operator had built a life that seemed perfect from the outside. A sprawling home in the wooded outskirts of Lake Monroe, Indiana, a thriving security consulting business, and a family he would die for. His wife Vivian, with her captivating smile and sharp intellect, had been his rock for 15 years. Their two children, Maddox, 14, and Lena, 12, were both bright and athletic, taking after their father's disciplined nature. For Dom, family wasn't just about blood. It was about loyalty, sacrifice, and an unbreakable code. Perhaps that's why the first signs of trouble were so easy to dismiss. The Palmers invited us to their lake house next weekend, Vivian mentioned one evening, not meeting his eyes as she scrolled through her phone. I said we'd go. Dom looked up from cleaning his hunting knife, a habit from his military days. We have Maddox's tournament that weekend. Already told him yes, Dom. It's important. Her tone had an edge to it, one that had been sharpening over the past few months. More important than our son's championship game? Dom set the knife down, studying his wife's face. Something had changed in Vivian recently. Phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. Late nights at her law office. A coldness in their bed that no amount of conversation could warm. "You know how much my family means to me," she said, finally looking up with a flash of defiance. "We can't miss another Palmer gathering. They're already saying you think you're too good for them." Dom fought back a bitter laugh. The Palmers, Vivian's wealthy family who'd never truly accepted the combat veteran who stole their prized daughter. A family whose gatherings felt more like trials, with Dom always standing accused. "Let them say what they want," Dom replied. "I'm not missing Maddox's game." That night, as they lay in silence, Dom reflected on how they'd reached this point. After leaving the Marines, he'd thrown himself into building his security business, working relentlessly to provide the stability his own broken childhood had lacked. Perhaps he'd been absent too often in those early years. Perhaps Vivian had never truly understood the nightmares that sometimes still jolted him awake, drenched in sweat, reaching for weapons that weren't there. The next morning, Dom found his daughter Lena sitting alone on the porch swing, her usual vibrance dimmed. "Everything okay, Lionheart?" he asked, using the nickname he'd given her as a toddler. Lena shrugged, a gesture so reminiscent of her mother that it made Dom's chest tighten. "Why does Uncle Preston keep coming over when you're not home?" Dom felt something cold slide down his spine. "Your mom's brother? When was he here?" "Yesterday. And last week. They talk really quietly in Mom's office. I don't think they like me hearing." Preston Palmer, the golden boy of the Palmer clan. Harvard Business School graduate. Wall Street success story. And the man who'd made it clear at every family gathering that Vivian had settled by marrying Dom. Did they say what they were talking about? Dom kept his voice casual, but the soldier in him was already connecting dots he didn't want to see. "Money stuff, I think." And Mom seemed upset. "Are we in trouble, Dad?" Dom pulled his daughter into a hug. "No trouble, Lionheart. Just grown-up things." That evening, Dom made a rare early departure from his office and drove past Preston's downtown condo on the way home. Vivian's car was parked in the visitor space, 3 hours before she was supposed to be home from work. He didn't confront her that night. Instead, he checked their joint accounts and discovered withdrawals, small at first, then increasingly larger over the past 6 months. Money they'd saved for the children's college funds, slowly disappearing. Dom began staying late at his office, not working, but watching, tracking Vivian's movements, installing a keystroke logger on their home computer. What he discovered wasn't just an affair, it was systematized betrayal. Vivian and Preston weren't lovers. They were conspirators. Preston, over-leveraged in high-risk investments, was using Vivian to siphon money from Dom's accounts. And Vivian, harboring long-buried resentment over giving up a prestigious law career to move to Dom's hometown, was all too willing to help, especially with the promise of returning to the gilded Palmer fold. "I've sacrificed everything for him," he read in one of her emails to Preston. 15 years living in this backward town, playing the dutiful wife while he chases his ridiculous security dreams. What has he ever sacrificed for me? Dom felt something inside him calcify. Not his heart, that was still beating, still bleeding, but something deeper. His sense of mercy. Chapter 2. Family Ties. The annual Palmer family reunion at Lake Michigan was a tradition dating back generations. For Dom, it had always been an exercise in endurance, smiling through thinly veiled insults, defending his common background to people who measured worth by zip codes and alma maters. This year, however, he arrived with knowledge burning in his chest like acid. Dominic, so good of you to actually show up this year. Carlisle Palmer, Vivian's father and the family patriarch, extended a manicured hand. His smile never reached his eyes. Wouldn't miss it, Carlisle. Dom matched the older man's grip with precise pressure, enough to assert strength without initiating challenge. The tactical mind that had kept him alive in combat zones never fully switched off. The Palmer estate sprawled across 3 acres of prime lakefront property. Crystal glinted in the afternoon sun as servers circulated with champagne. Vivian had already drifted toward her cousins, her laugh a little too bright, her gestures a little too animated. Preston arrived late, making an entrance in a tailored suit that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. The way Vivian's eyes tracked him across the lawn confirmed everything Dom already knew. Uncle Dom. A small whirlwind crashed into his legs. Ava, Preston's 6-year-old daughter from his first marriage. Daddy says you're going to teach me to skip rocks. Dom lifted the child, momentarily lightened by her uncomplicated affection. Your daddy said that, did he? Well, we better not disappoint. At the water's edge, Dom showed Ava the perfect wrist motion for skipping stones, aware of Preston watching them from the terrace. Your daughter is adorable, Dom said when Preston finally approached. She has your eyes. And her mother's inability to sit still, Preston replied with practiced charm. Thanks for entertaining her. Parenting solo isn't easy. No, it isn't. Dom met his brother-in-law's gaze, especially when you're busy with other priorities. A flicker of unease crossed Preston's face. What's that supposed to mean? Dom skipped another stone. 5 perfect bounces. Just making conversation. The afternoon progressed with the usual Palmer formalities. Speeches about family legacy. Toast after toast to business successes. Dom observed it all, noting how Vivian's mother Elizabeth kept refilling her wine glass, how Preston's hand brushed Vivian's back when they thought no one was looking, not in passion, but in reassurance. You seem different today, Carlisle commented as they stood by the bar. More present. Dom accepted a whiskey neat. I've been doing a lot of reflecting lately. About what matters. Perhaps you're finally seeing the value of connections, Carlisle said. Preston tells me your security business is struggling. The Palmer name opens doors, Dominic. It always has. Is that what Preston says? Dom swirled his drink. Interesting. There's no shame in accepting help from family, Carlisle continued, misreading Dom's response as pride. Vivian is a Palmer, after all. Her future, and your children's futures, are tied to this family's legacy. And what about loyalty, Carlisle? Dom asked quietly. Where does that fit in your legacy? The older man's expression hardened. Loyalty is earned, not given. Perhaps you should consider what you've done to earn Vivian's. Before Dom could respond, Vivian's brother Nelson approached, already swaying from too many cocktails. The soldier boy's still here. Nelson slapped Dom's back with drunken camaraderie. Thought you'd have retreated by now. Strategic withdrawal and all that military crap. Dom set down his glass. Some battles are worth fighting, Nelson. Oh, we're talking battles now. Nelson's voice rose, drawing attention. Because from where I'm standing, you lost this one years ago. My sister deserved better than being stuck in your nowhere town with your. Dom cut him off with a look so cold that Nelson physically recoiled. Choose your next words carefully. The confrontation might have ended there if Preston hadn't appeared, positioning himself between them with the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to defusing others' messes. Everything all right here? Dom, I think Vivian's looking for you. Dom turned to find his wife watching the exchange, her expression caught between embarrassment and alarm. As he approached her, she hissed, "What are you doing? Can't you get through one day without causing a scene?" "Interesting perspective," Dom replied, keeping his voice level. "Tell me, when did you first decide to help Preston steal from us?" Vivian's face drained of color. "What are you? College funds, retirement accounts, even that little emergency cash we keep in the gun safe." Dom maintained eye contact, watching her composure crumble. "Did you think I wouldn't notice?" "It's not what you think," she whispered, glancing around to ensure no one overheard. "Preston's in trouble. Real trouble. He needed a loan." "A loan," Dom repeated. "Is that what we're calling theft now?" "He's family, Dom. And what am I?" The question hung between them, heavy with 15 years of history. Vivian's answer was interrupted by Carlyle calling for everyone's attention. The patriarch raised his glass in a toast that somehow became a thinly veiled lecture about family loyalty and the importance of knowing one's place. Throughout the speech, Dom felt the weight of stares, some curious, some hostile, all judging. When the formal dinner began, Dom found himself seated between Elizabeth Palmer and Nelson's wife Tanya, both of whom maintained a rigid wall of small talk. Across the table, Preston engaged Vivian in an animated conversation about a recent Supreme Court decision, their heads bent together in a familiarity that now felt like a deliberate provocation. Halfway through the main course, Nelson, even more intoxicated, began loudly recounting stories from Vivian's law school days, each anecdote carefully chosen to emphasize what she'd given up by marrying Dom. "Remember that clerkship offer from Justice Richards?" Nelson laughed. "Could have been arguing before the Supreme Court by now if you hadn't gotten domestic." "I chose my family," Vivian replied, but her eyes betrayed her, flicking toward Preston, not Dom. "Some choices we live to regret," Preston added softly, and the table fell silent. Dom set down his fork. "Are you speaking from experience, Preston? Because from where I sit, your choices seem remarkably convenient, especially when they involve other people's money." The room temperature seemed to drop. Preston's smile became fixed. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "No implications. Just facts." Dom turned to Carlyle. "Did you know your son is almost $20 million in debt? That he's been using Vivian to funnel my family's savings into a black hole of bad investments and margin calls?" Chaos erupted around the table. Denials. Accusations. Vivian grabbing Dom's arm, her nails digging into his flesh as she demanded they talk privately. Dom, remembering how those same hands had once caressed him with love, now transformed into weapons meant to silence him. He stood abruptly, addressing the stunned faces around the table. "For 15 years, I've endured your condescension, your mockery. I believed family was worth the sacrifice of dignity. I was wrong." Vivian followed him as he walked away from the table, her voice shrill with panic. "You're embarrassing us. This isn't the place." "Where's the place, Viv?" "Our home, where you've been planning how to leave me. The bank, where you forged my signature to access accounts. Or maybe Preston's condo, where you've been strategizing while I thought you were at work." The guest had abandoned all pretense of not listening. Carlyle rose from his seat, face flushed with rage. "This is outrageous. Vivian, control your husband." Dom laughed, a harsh, unfamiliar sound. "That's always been the problem, hasn't it? No one controls me. Not you, not Preston, not even Vivian. I earned everything I have through blood and sacrifice while you were playing country club politics." "Dom, please," Vivian pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "We can talk about this at home. The children you were planning to take from me?" Dom pulled out his phone, showing her the email chain he'd discovered. "The children you and Preston decided would be better off with proper Palmer influence." Vivian's face crumpled. "It wasn't like that. We just—" "Stop lying." Dom's voice was deadly quiet. "For once in your life, stop lying." What followed was a blur of accusations. Preston denying everything despite the evidence. Carlyle threatening legal action. Nelson making a drunken lunge that Dom sidestepped, sending the younger man sprawling into an antique sideboard. Elizabeth weeping dramatically as priceless china shattered on imported marble. And finally, Vivian, her composure completely broken, screaming words that silenced the room. After a brutal argument with my wife's family at the reunion, everyone turned their backs on me, even my wife. Dom looked around at the hostile faces, these people who had never accepted him. You have two choices, beg for forgiveness or get out, she snarled. Instead of begging, I purchased a one-way ticket to disappear. When they finally realized I was gone, the damage was irreversible. Chapter 3. Vanishing Acts. The night air felt electric as Dom drove away from the Palmer estate, his hand steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. He didn't return home. Instead, he checked into a motel outside Chicago, paid cash, and initiated the contingency plan he'd been meticulously developing over the past 3 weeks. His military training had taught him that the best operations were planned with multiple exit strategies. For 15 years, he'd applied that principle to protecting his family. Now, he would use it to dismantle the life that had become a lie. First, he transferred funds from accounts Vivian didn't know about to offshore holdings established through a security firm's international contracts. Next, he made a series of calls to contact from his military days. Men who understood that sometimes disappearing was the only tactical choice. Need to go dark for a while, he told his former teammate Raul Delgado, now running a fishing charter in Panama. Everything in place? Ready when you are, brother, Raul confirmed. The clinic expecting you. 5th of next month. Papers and credentials all set. Dom had planned this with military precision. A new identity, backstopped with documentation that would withstand scrutiny. Not illegal, exactly, but operating in the gray areas where his security business had occasionally ventured for high-value clients. What about the kids? Raul asked, concern evident even through the crackling international connection. Dom's throat tightened. They're part of Phase 2. I need to make sure they're protected financially first. The hardest call was to his attorney, Leona Washington, the only person besides Raul who knew the full extent of his plans. They'll freeze everything once they realize what's happening, Leona warned. You sure about this timeline? It gives me exactly what I need. 72 hours of confusion before they can organize a legal response. Dom had calculated every variable. The trust for the children is already ironclad. Neither Vivian nor her family can touch it. And the letter for the kids? Deliver it exactly 1 month after I'm gone, Dom instructed. Not before. Back at the motel, Dom powered up a dedicated laptop and accessed the evidence he'd been compiling. Financial records showing Preston's massive debts, emails revealing the conspiracy between Preston and Vivian, documentation of the systematic theft from family accounts. With a few keystrokes, he scheduled these files to be delivered to specific individuals. Carlisle Palmer, the partners at Preston's investment firm, and a financial crimes investigator at the FBI whom Dom had once helped after a difficult deployment. The delivery date, 3 weeks from now. Long enough for Dom to be established in his new location, but soon enough to catch Preston before he could cover his tracks. Dom slept soundly that night for the first time in months, waking before dawn to begin the next phase. He drove to an airport 2 states away, where a private charter waited to fly him to Mexico. From there, he would make his way to Panama, then further south to Argentina, a country with strong privacy laws and a bureaucracy that moved too slowly to be a threat. As the small plane climbed through cloud cover, Dom allowed himself one moment of grief for what he was leaving behind. Not Vivian. Whatever love had existed between them had been hollowed out long ago by her resentment and his own emotional walls. Not the Palmer family with their toxic privilege, but his children, Maddox with his quiet determination, Lena with her fierce intelligence. For them, this disappearance would feel like abandonment, exactly what Dom had experienced as a child when his own father vanished. The knowledge cut deeper than any physical wound he'd sustained in combat. But he consoled himself with the truth. This wasn't abandonment. It was strategic retreat before the counterattack. The first communication since his disappearance came 3 days later. A text from Vivian to a burner phone Dom had established for this purpose. Where are you? The children are asking questions. This isn't funny anymore. He didn't respond. The second message came from Preston. Whatever you think, we can fix this. Come home, and we'll talk like adults. Dom archived the message without replying. The third was from Carlisle Palmer himself. You've made your point. Now stop this childish game before you destroy what's left of your family's reputation. Dom smiled grimly at that one. Reputation, always the Palmer priority. The messages from his children broke his resolve. Maddox, practical and direct. Dad, Mom's freaking out. She says you guys had a fight. When are you coming home? And Lena, her text filled with the emotional intuition that sometimes made Dom wonder if she could read minds. I know something bad happened. Mom won't tell us the truth. Please just let me know you're okay. I won't tell her if you don't want me to. To these, Dom did respond, careful to use a secure connection that couldn't be traced. I'm safe. I love you both more than anything. What's happening now is between your mother and me. I will always be your father, and I will always protect you. Trust that, even when it doesn't make sense. In Argentina, Dom established himself as David Reeves, a security consultant specializing in high-risk corporate operations. The documentation Raul had provided was flawless, and Dom's actual expertise made the cover identity virtually undetectable. He rented a modest apartment in Buenos Aires, set up a local bank account with a portion of his secured funds, and began building the framework for what came next. Every night, he accessed a secured server where software monitored the digital footprints of the Palmer family. He watched as Vivian hired a private investigator, as Preston liquidated assets to cover immediate debts, as Carlisle's lawyers began proceedings to declare Dom legally missing to gain control over joint assets. None of it would work. Dom had spent years developing security systems to protect assets from exactly this type of maneuver. What they didn't know, what none of them could possibly understand, was that this disappearance wasn't an emotional reaction to betrayal. It was the first move in a campaign Dom had been strategizing since the moment he confirmed Vivian's treachery. 20 days after his disappearance, Dom received a secure message from Leona. They're getting desperate. V filed abandonment charges. P liquidating everything he can. The old man hired serious muscle, ex-CIA types asking questions about your military connections. Dom had anticipated this. The Palmers' wealth and connections made them dangerous, but their privileged arrogance made them predictable. They believed money could solve any problem, open any door. They had never faced an adversary trained to counteract precisely that advantage. 3 weeks to the day after his disappearance, Dom activated the final phase of his initial plan. The evidence he'd compiled was automatically delivered to its designated recipients. Within hours, the carefully constructed Palmer facade began to crumble. Preston was placed on immediate leave by his firm as federal investigators seized records related to client accounts. Carlisle, confronted with irrefutable evidence of his son's financial crimes, withdrew the considerable legal resources he'd deployed to find Dom, focusing instead on damage control. And Vivian, suddenly facing questions about her role in the financial irregularities, found her carefully cultivated image as the victimized wife giving way to suspicion. Dom watched it all unfold from thousands of miles away, not with satisfaction, but with grim resolve. This was merely the foundation. The true architecture of his revenge was still taking shape. In the quiet of his Buenos Aires apartment, Dom began planning the next phase. The Palmers had resources, but they had never faced an opponent who understood their greatest weakness, their pathological need to maintain appearances. Dom had spent 15 years observing this vulnerability, mapping the pressure points in their carefully constructed social edifice. Now, he would systematically apply pressure until the entire structure collapsed. When his secure phone buzzed with a message from Leona, Dom expected another update on the legal proceedings. Instead, what he read sent ice through his veins. They took the kids from school. Private plane to Caymans. Emergency custody filing claims you're mentally unstable from PTSD. Hearing scheduled next week. For the first time since this began, Dom felt a surge of genuine rage break through his tactical calm. Using the children as pawns was a miscalculation the Palmers would live to regret. He booked a flight leaving in 3 hours. Phase 2 was now accelerating ahead of schedule. Chapter 4: Ghost Protocols. 6 months after vanishing from the Palmer family reunion, Dom Russo was a ghost with substance, a shadow that had learned to move through light without being seen. The man who stepped off a private plane in Georgetown, Cayman Islands, bore little physical resemblance to the security consultant who had disappeared. His military short hair had grown out, now streaked with strategic gray. A carefully maintained beard concealed the distinctive scar on his jaw. Enhanced contact lenses changed his eye color from penetrating blue to unremarkable brown. But the most significant transformation wasn't physical. The Dom Russo who had disappeared was a man constrained by moral boundaries. The man who emerged, operating under the identity of Michael Hargrove, international risk consultant, had shed those constraints like a tactical vest that had served its purpose. The Cayman Ritz-Carlton suite he checked into offered a direct view of the exclusive private school where, according to his intelligence, the Palmer family had enrolled Maddox and Lena. The Palmers believed the children were safely beyond his reach, protected by the island's strict privacy laws and the legal fiction of a custody agreement Dom had never signed. What they failed to understand was that Dom had spent his military career penetrating more heavily fortified locations than a private school, and with significantly higher stakes than his own children's futures. He spent 3 days on surveillance, establishing patterns and vulnerabilities. The children were driven to school in a black SUV with hired security, a former British Royal Marine whom Dom identified through his network of contacts. The same vehicle collected them each afternoon, taking them to a gated beachfront estate owned by a Palmer Shell corporation. During those surveillance days, Dom experienced his first visual confirmation that his children were safe, physically at least. Watching Maddox playing soccer on the school field, his lanky frame now several inches taller, Dom felt a bittersweet pride mingled with rage at the time stolen from him. Seeing Lena sitting alone under a palm tree with a book, always the introvert, he noticed how she frequently scanned her surroundings as if looking for someone. For him, perhaps. On the 4th day, Dom made his approach through a service entrance during lunch period. The school security was designed to keep unauthorized adults out, not to monitor students already inside. He found Lena first, sitting alone in the library, exactly where his intelligence suggested she would be. When she looked up and saw him, her eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with tears. Before she could make a sound that might draw attention, Dom pressed a finger to his lips and slid into the chair across from her. "Lionheart," he whispered, using the nickname that belonged only to them. "Dad," her voice trembled. "Is it really you?" "It's me. I don't have much time. I need you to listen carefully." Dom slid a secure phone across the table. "This can't be traced. The password is your birth date followed by the name of your first goldfish." Lena stared at the phone, then back at him. "Are you taking us home?" The question pierced Dom's carefully maintained tactical focus. "Not yet, but soon. I need to make sure it's safe first. They're watching you too closely right now. They told us you had a breakdown, that you were dangerous." Lena's voice hardened. "I never believed them." "Good." Dom reached across the table, briefly touching her hand. "I need your help. Maddox too, but you can't tell him you saw me today." "Not yet." Lena nodded, her expression shifting from emotional to resolute in a way that reminded Dom painfully of himself. "What do you need us to do?" "Information. I need to know everything about your daily routines, who has access to you, where you're permitted to go." Dom kept his voice low. "Use the phone only in the bathroom with the shower running. There's a secure messenger app that deletes messages after they're read." "Mom hardly sees us anymore," Lena volunteered, seemingly eager to prove her value as an informant. "She's always with Uncle Preston or on the phone with lawyers. Grandpa visits twice a week. He makes Maddox play golf with him." Dom absorbed this, fitting it into the broader tactical picture. "And school? Are you making friends? They don't speak to us much. Everyone knows our family has some big secret." Lena's eyes, so like his own, searched his face. "Are you really okay, Dad? You look different." "I'm better than okay," Dom assured her. "I'm exactly where I need to be." The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, all the time Dom could risk without alerting security. Before leaving, he handed Lena a small tracking device disguised as a hair clip. "Wear this every day he instructed. It's waterproof. Never take it off. As he prepared to leave, Lena grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Promise you'll come back for us. I swear it. Dom held her gaze. But when I do, things will change in ways you might not understand at first. Trust that everything I do is to protect you and your brother. He slipped away as silently as he had arrived, exiting through a service door just as the lunch bell rang. Back in his hotel room, Dom activated the tracking system linked to Lena's hair clip, confirming it was functioning properly. Then he made a secure call to Raul. Phase 3 is a go, he said without preamble. Activate the Panama accounts and alert our friend at Interpol. The package drops in 72 hours. The package was information, devastating in its comprehensiveness. Financial records showing how Preston Palmer had been systematically defrauding investors for years. Evidence of Carlisle Palmer's knowledge of these activities. Documentation of offshore accounts used to hide assets from regulators and tax authorities. And most damaging of all, records of the Palmer family's involvement with certain international business partners whose activities straddled the line between questionable and criminal. Dom had spent 6 months compiling this dossier, leveraging contacts from his military and security consulting days. People who owed him favors. People who understood that sometimes justice required operating outside formal channels. The information would go to financial regulators, tax authorities, and media outlets simultaneously, a coordinated strike designed to create maximum chaos. While waiting for this bomb to detonate, Dom continued his covert communication with Lena, piecing together a complete picture of the Palmer family's new dynamics. What emerged confirmed his strategic assumptions. With Preston fighting to salvage his career and reputation, with Vivian increasingly isolated by suspicion, the family's formidable resources were already stretched thin. They were vulnerable in ways they couldn't possibly recognize. On the third day, Lena's secure message contained the information Dom had been waiting for. Emergency family meeting tonight. Grandpa arrived 2 hours ago looking sick. Everyone's shouting. Mom's crying. Maddox and I sent to our rooms. Security doubled around the house. The information drop had hit its targets. Now for the next phase. Dom waited until midnight, then slipped out of his hotel, wearing the uniform of the estate's security service, obtained through methods he'd perfected during military operations in countries where American forces officially didn't exist. The perimeter guards, expecting threats from outside, were unprepared for an infiltrator who moved like one of their own. He found Maddox first, not sleeping but sitting on his balcony, staring at the ocean. The boy had Dom's build and Vivian's coloring, a combination that had always made Dom's chest swell with pride. Now, seeing his son for the first time in months, Dom registered the changes. Harder lines around the mouth, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. "Hello, son," Dom said quietly, stepping from the shadows. Maddox started violently, then froze, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and something like anger. "Dad? How did you?" "I'll explain everything," Dom promised, "but not here. We don't have much time." Unlike Lena's tears, Maddox responded with the wariness of a teenager already learning to distrust. "They said you abandoned us, that you stole money and ran away. And you believe that?" Dom kept his voice neutral, understanding his son's confusion. "I didn't know what to believe." Maddox's fists clenched at his sides. "You were just gone? No call, no letter, nothing for months. I'm sorry for that." Dom moved closer, ready to restrain his son if the boy decided to shout for help. "I had to disappear to protect all of us. Your mother and Uncle Preston were stealing from us, from your future. They planned to take you both away where I'd never find you." Maddox's expression hardened. "Prove it." Dom pulled out his phone, showing his son some of the same evidence that was now wreaking havoc in financial and legal circles. Emails, bank records, Vivian's own words planning the children's removal. As Maddox scanned through the documents, his face paled. "This is why everyone's freaking out downstairs. Some kind of financial thing." "That's part of it," Dom confirmed. "But I'm not here about money. I'm here about you and your sister." "What does that mean?" Suspicion edged Maddox's voice. "Are you kidnapping us?" Dom shook his head. No, I'm giving you a choice. The kind I never got. He leaned against the balcony railing. In 3 days, I'll be in position to take you both back to the States with me. Legally, your mother and the Palmers won't be able to stop it. And if we don't want to go, Maddox challenged, though something in his eyes had softened. Then I'll respect that decision, Dom said, the words costing him more than his son could know. But first, I need you to understand exactly what's happening. The kind of people you're living with. For the next 15 minutes, Dom laid out the truth. Not all of it, but enough for Maddox to understand stakes. The boy listened in silence, his expression growing increasingly troubled. What about Mom? He finally asked. Is she going to jail or something? That depends on her, Dom replied honestly. If she cooperates with authorities about Preston's activities, probably not. But things will change, Maddox. The Palmer family is about to experience a very public fall. Maddox absorbed this, then asked the question Dom had been waiting for. What do you want us to do? For now, nothing. Act normal. Stay close to Lena. In 3 days, be ready. Dom handed his son a secure phone identical to Lena's. This is for emergencies only. If anything changes, if they try to move you somewhere else, contact me immediately. As Dom prepared to leave, Maddox asked one final question. Are you okay, Dad? You look different. Dom smiled, a genuine expression that briefly revealed the father beneath the tactical operator. I'm better than I've been in years. Clearer, stronger. The man you knew before was compromising too much of himself to keep peace with people who never deserved it. 3 days later, as financial regulators descended on Palmer investments and media outlets ran stories about the fall of a financial dynasty, Dom initiated the final stage of this phase. With the family in crisis mode, their attention diverted to damage control, he implemented a legal maneuver prepared months in advance. Emergency custody papers citing child endangerment due to the children's proximity to an ongoing financial crimes investigation. Supporting documentation from child welfare experts. And most crucially, testimony from a Palmer family insider, Elizabeth Palmer herself, Vivian's mother, who had been quietly cooperating with Dom since receiving evidence of Preston's misuse of her personal trust fund. The hearing took less than an hour. With Elizabeth's testimony and the mountain of evidence now public regarding the Palmer financial improprieties, the judge granted Dom temporary custody pending further hearings in the United States. By nightfall, Dom and his children were on a private plane bound for a location known only to Raul and Leona. As the plane climbed through cloud cover, Lena slept fitfully across 2 seats while Maddox stared out the window, his expression unreadable. What happens now? The boy finally asked, turning to face his father. Now we rebuild, Dom answered. On our terms. No more lies. No more compromises. And Mom, Maddox persisted. Will we see her again? Dom studied his son's face, seeing the conflict there. That's up to her. And to you. I won't keep you from her, if that's what you want. But she'll have to earn back your trust, just as I'm doing now. Maddox nodded slowly, then said the words Dom hadn't realized he'd been waiting to hear. I'm glad you came back for us, Dad. For the first time in months, Dom felt something crack in the hardened shell he'd built around himself. Not enough to change his course. The next phases of his plan were already in motion, but enough to remind him of what he was truly fighting for. Chapter 5, Paper Trail. The remote ranch in western Montana provided exactly what Dom needed: isolation, security, and time. Situated on 200 acres of private land, accessible only by a single road that could be monitored from 3 different vantage points, it offered a fortress-like environment where Dom could safely reunite with his children while executing the next stages of his plan. For the first week, they existed in a strange limbo, Maddox and Lena adjusting to their father's transformed presence, Dom relearning the rhythms of parenthood after months of solitary focus. They hiked the surrounding mountains, fished in the pristine stream that cut through the property. At night, they sat around a fire pit, the silence between them gradually softening from awkward to contemplative. Why Montana? Lena asked on the 8th night, bundled in a jacket against the mountain chill. We've never even been here before. That's exactly why, Dom explained, stoking the fire. No connections to our past. No one looking for us here. Are we hiding? Maddox's question contained an edge, not accusation, but the need for clarity that Dom recognized in himself. Strategically positioned, Dom corrected, "There's a difference." During those initial weeks, Dom maintained strict communications protocols. No internet access for the children. No phones except the secure satellite line. News from the outside world came through Leona's encrypted updates, painting a picture of escalating chaos in the Palmer Empire. Preston had been indicted on multiple counts of securities fraud. Carlyle, fighting to distance himself from his son's actions, had suffered a minor stroke, temporarily stepping back from his leadership role in the family businesses. And Vivian, granted a supervised visit with the children that she had inexplicably canceled at the last minute, had filed a counterpetition for custody, claiming Dom had manipulated evidence and coerced her mother's testimony. "Mom saying you brainwashed Grandma Elizabeth?" Maddox asked when Dom shared a redacted version of this update. "That's crazy. Grandma Elizabeth doesn't let anyone tell her what to think. People will say whatever they need to when they're desperate," Dom replied, carefully monitoring his son's reaction. "Your grandmother made her choice when she saw the evidence of what Preston had done with her money." What Dom didn't share with his children was the true nature of Elizabeth Palmer's cooperation. The woman hadn't turned against her family out of moral outrage, but out of self-preservation. Dom had made sure the evidence he provided showed how Preston had specifically targeted his mother's accounts, knowing she rarely reviewed financial statements. Elizabeth's testimony against her son and husband had been a calculated decision to protect her own assets from the coming legal storm. As weeks turned to months, the ranch became something like a home. Dom established a rigorous homeschooling program, leveraging online resources and his own considerable knowledge in mathematics, history, and languages. Maddox, initially resistant, gradually engaged with the challenging curriculum. Lena thrived under the individualized attention, her natural intelligence finding new outlets. "You're different as a teacher," she observed one afternoon as they worked through an advanced calculus problem. "More patient." Dom considered this. "I have clarity now. Before, I was always divided, trying to balance what the Palmers expected, what your mother wanted, what my business needed. And what about what you wanted?" Lena's perception sometimes startled him. "I wanted our family to be whole," Dom answered honestly. "I just didn't see that it never truly was." 6 months into their Montana existence, Dom initiated the next phase of his plan. With Preston's trial date approaching and the Palmer financial empire increasingly unstable, the time had come to apply pressure to the few load-bearing pillars still standing. "I need to go away for a few days," he told the children over dinner. "Raoul will stay with you." Maddox's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Where are you going?" "New York," Dom said, offering the partial truth he'd prepared. "There are legal matters regarding your trust that need my personal attention." What he didn't say was that New York was merely his first stop on a journey that would take him to 3 countries in 5 days, activating networks and resources positioned months earlier. While the children slept, Dom briefed Raoul on security protocols, then packed a single carry-on with essentials. At dawn, he slipped away in the ranch's rugged Jeep, driving 2 hours to a private airstrip where a chartered plane waited. In New York, he met with Leona in a secure office space rented under one of his shell companies. "The judge is wavering on the permanent custody arrangement," she reported, sliding a file across the conference table. "Vivian's lawyers are pushing the PTSD angle hard, claiming your military background makes you unstable." Dom scanned the documents, his expression neutral despite the familiar rage simmering beneath. "They're getting desperate. What about the offshore accounts?" "Frozen but not seized." Leona tapped a spreadsheet. "The Treasury Department investigation hit a wall when they reached the Cayman Shell corporations. They need more to connect Preston directly to the transfers. They'll have it by the end of the week," Dom assured her, not elaborating on how this evidence would materialize. His next stop was Zurich, where banking privacy laws had protected certain Palmer family assets for generations. Using credentials established during his security consulting days, Dom met with financial investigators who had been quietly building cases against multiple high-profile clients of the bank that housed the Palmer trusts. The documentation you provided previously was illuminating, acknowledged a stern-faced Swiss regulator, speaking in careful, accented English. But without internal transfer authorizations, we cannot move against these specific accounts. Dom placed a small drive on the table. This should resolve that issue. The drive contained transaction logs obtained through methods Dom would never disclose. Not illegal in themselves, but acquired through channels that operated in the gray spaces between nations, regulations, and ethical boundaries. From Switzerland, Dom flew to the Cayman Islands. Not to the main tourism centers, but to a small office complex on the less developed eastern shore. Here, he met with a former colleague from his military days, now working in financial intelligence. "You understand what happens if this goes public," the man warned, reviewing the dossier Dom had brought. "It won't just be the Palmers who face consequences. There are powerful people connected to these transactions." "I'm counting on it," Dom replied, his voice devoid of either concern or satisfaction. The broader the impact, the more coverage it receives. The more coverage, the more pressure on all parties to resolve quickly. The man studied Dom's face. "This isn't just about the money they took from you, is it?" "It never was," Dom confirmed. "Money can be replaced. Trust can't." Back in New York 5 days later, Dom sat across from Leona in the same secure office, reviewing the cascade of events his journey had triggered. Banking regulators in 3 countries had frozen Palmer-connected accounts. Investigators had expanded their focus beyond Preston to Carlyle's decades of financial maneuvering. And most significantly, several of the Palmers' longtime business associates, including 2 prominent political figures, had publicly distanced themselves from the family. Vivian's filed for divorce, Leona reported, sliding another document across the table, claiming abandonment and emotional distress. Dom scanned the filing without reaction. Expected. What about her connection to Preston's activities? "She's positioning herself as another victim," Leona said, claiming she signed documents without understanding them. That Preston manipulated her concern for the children to gain access to accounts. And are the prosecutors buying it? Not entirely, but they're more interested in Preston and Carlyle. She's offered testimony in exchange for immunity. Dom absorbed this information, fitting it into the larger strategy. She's sacrificing her brother and father to save herself. That's what Palmers do, apparently, Leona observed. Eat their own when threatened. Before returning to Montana, Dom made one final stop, a nondescript office building in downtown Manhattan. The man who greeted him in the penthouse suite wore the confident ease of someone accustomed to operating at the highest levels of power. "The materials you provided have been educational," the man said, foregoing introductions. Both knew exactly who the other was. "My clients are particularly interested in the Cayman structure. And are they prepared to act?" Dom asked. "Once the Treasury Department moves officially, yes. The timing needs to appear coincidental, not coordinated." Dom nodded, understanding the delicate choreography required. "And the media coverage?" "The first stories will break next Tuesday. Financial press initially, mainstream outlets by Thursday." The man studied Dom with professional curiosity. "You've orchestrated this with remarkable precision. May I ask why?" "The Palmers built their empire on the appearance of impeccability," Dom replied. "Remove that foundation, and everything above it collapses." The man seemed satisfied with this answer. "The children are secure?" "They're protected," Dom confirmed, not elaborating on their location. "Good. There will be desperation in certain quarters as this unfolds. People backed into corners rarely exhibit restraint." Dom allowed himself a cold smile. "I'm counting on it." When he returned to the ranch, Dom found the children thriving under Raoul's watchful care. Maddox had built a functioning hydroelectric generator for the stream, while Lena had started a comprehensive journal of local wildlife. They greeted him with a warmth that had been absent in the early days of their Montana exile. That night, as they gathered around the fire pit beneath a canopy of stars, Dom knew the time had come for difficult truths. "Things are going to change again soon," he began, watching their faces in the flickering light. "Your mother has filed for divorce." Maddox stared into the flames. "Are we surprised?" The legal situation with the Palmer family is becoming more complicated, Dom continued. There may be news reports that mention all of us. Things might be said that are painful to hear. Like what? Lena asked, her voice small but steady. Dom measured his words carefully. Your mother is cooperating with investigators against Uncle Preston and your grandfather. In exchange, she's asking for certain considerations, including custody of you both. Silence followed this announcement, broken only by the crackling fire and the distant call of an owl. Finally, Maddox spoke, his voice hard in a way that reminded Dom painfully of himself. Does she really think we go back to her? After everything? People convince themselves of whatever they need to believe, Dom said. But I promise you both, you won't be forced to do anything you don't want to do. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Dom sat alone on the porch, reviewing the final stages of his plan on a secure tablet. The timing had to be perfect. Too fast, and the full impact would be diluted. Too slow, and the Palmers might find ways to insulate themselves from the worst consequences. As he worked through contingencies, his secure phone buzzed with a message from an unexpected source. Elizabeth Palmer. They know you're behind everything. Carlisle has hired people to find you. Not legal people. Be careful. Dom wasn't surprised by this development. The Palmers, cornered and desperate, were reverting to their true nature, believing that with enough money and the right connections, any problem could be eliminated. What they failed to understand was that Dom had spent his entire military career becoming the kind of problem that couldn't be eliminated by conventional means. He sent a brief acknowledgement to Elizabeth, then made 2 calls. The first to Raul, initiating enhanced security protocols for the ranch. The second to a number he had memorized but never used, a direct line to the former commander of his Special Operations Unit, now working in private security. Mason, Dom said when the call connected. I need a favor. 3 days later, as financial news outlets began running the first stories about systematic fraud in Palmer investment vehicles, Dom gathered the children for another difficult conversation. We may need to move soon, he told them, watching their expressions shift from contentment to wariness. Your grandfather has escalated the situation in ways that make staying here potentially unsafe. What does that mean? Maddox demanded. Is he like sending people after us? He's exploring options that go beyond legal channels, Dom confirmed, seeing no benefit in shielding them from reality at this point. I've taken precautions, but our security here isn't indefinite. Where would we go? Lena asked, the practical question masking the fear Dom could see in her eyes. I have a place prepared, he assured them. Somewhere even more secure than this. What he didn't tell them was that the place was actually 3 different locations, each designed to serve as a fallback if the others were compromised. The primary site, a compound in the mountains of Costa Rica, owned by a corporation so deeply buried in shell companies that even the most determined investigator would need years to trace it, was already being prepared by contacts Dom trusted with his life and, more importantly, with his children's lives. That night, as a precaution, Dom had the children pack essential items in go bags designed for rapid evacuation. He showed them the hidden panic room beneath the main house, accessible through a concealed entrance in the pantry. He reviewed emergency protocols, hand signals, and rally points. This is like being in a spy movie, Lena observed as Dom taught her how to use the satellite phone's emergency beacon. It's just preparation, Dom corrected gently. The same way we prepare for fire drills or power outages. Except instead of weather, we're preparing for Grandpa's hit squad. Maddox added with dark humor that concerned Dom more than outright fear would have. Your grandfather is desperate and afraid, Dom explained. People in that state make poor decisions. We're simply ensuring those decisions don't affect us. The first indication that Carlisle's poor decisions had escalated came 2 days later, when perimeter sensors detected vehicles approaching the single-access road to the ranch. Dom, alerted by silent alarms, moved with practiced efficiency. Panic room, he instructed the children, his voice calm but brooking no argument. Raul will stay with you. Do not open for anyone but me, no matter what you hear. Once the children were secured, Dom positioned himself at a pre-selected vantage point with clear sight lines to the approaching vehicles. Through high-powered binoculars, he identified 3 SUVs, unmarked, with tinted windows and government-issue license plates. Not Carlisle's private security, then. Something else. When the vehicles stopped at the gate and uniformed agents emerged, Dom felt a complex mix of emotions. FBI, not immediate danger to the children, but potentially a significant complication to his larger strategy. He watched as they approached the main house, noting their tactical positioning. Professional, but not aggressive. Not a raid, then. Something else. Dom activated his secure phone, contacting Leona. Federal agents at the ranch, he reported calmly. 3 vehicles. Standard approach formation. That's impossible, Leona replied, alarm evident in her voice. The judge sealed all records of your location pending the custody hearing. Apparently someone unsealed them, Dom observed, already calculating how this development affected his plans. Options. Let me make some calls, Leona said. Don't engage until I get back to you. Dom had no intention of engaging. The moment unfamiliar vehicles had triggered the sensors, secondary protocols had activated, including a data purge of all non-essential systems in the house and the activation of countermeasures designed to obscure digital footprints. He continued observing as agents knocked on the door, then moved to secure the perimeter of the house. Their movements suggested a search warrant rather than an arrest warrant, looking for evidence, not an individual. When Leona called back 20 minutes later, her voice was tight with controlled anger. It's not about you, she reported. They're executing a search warrant related to Preston's case. Someone suggested he might have hidden documents or drives at properties connected to you. Dom processed this information, seeing its strategic implications immediately. Vivian, most likely, Leona confirmed. She's positioning herself as the cooperative witness, pointing them toward anyone but herself. And the judge authorized a search based on that. Preston's case has become highly political. The prosecutors are under pressure to show results. Leona paused. This could actually work in our favor if handled correctly. Dom considered the tactical landscape. How so? If they find nothing, which they won't, since Preston never set foot on that property, it undermines Vivian's credibility as a witness. Makes her look desperate and vindictive. Dom watched as agents photographed the exterior of the house. And if I approach them now? Cooperate fully, Leona advised. You have nothing to hide regarding Preston's financial crimes. Your presence here isn't illegal. The custody order gives you every right to be with your children at a location of your choosing. After ending the call, Dom made his decision. He secured his weapon in a hidden compartment, then walked openly down the hill toward the house, hands visible, expression neutral. Gentlemen, he called as he approached. I believe you're looking for me. The lead agent turned, hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm before registering Dom's non-threatening posture. Dominic Russo, the agent asked, studying Dom's face as if comparing it to a photograph. That's right, Dom confirmed. May I ask what brings the FBI to my property? What followed was a 6-hour exercise in calculated cooperation. Dom provided identification, answered questions about his relationship with Preston Palmer, truthfully minimal, and consented to a search of the property, except for the panic room, which he claimed was a standard storm shelter currently undergoing maintenance. The agents, finding nothing to connect the ranch to Preston's financial activities, eventually departed with professional courtesy but obvious frustration. Only after their vehicles had passed beyond the perimeter sensors did Dom retrieve the children from the panic room. Were those really FBI agents? Maddox asked, his voice a mixture of fear and fascination. Yes, Dom confirmed, seeing no benefit in deception. Looking for evidence connected to Uncle Preston's case. Did Mom send them? Lena's perception, as always, cut straight to the heart of the matter. Dom met his daughter's gaze. It's possible she suggested they look here, yes. Why would she do that? Maddox demanded, anger flashing in his eyes. She knows Uncle Preston never came here. Because she's running out of options, Dom explained, choosing his words carefully. When people feel cornered, they sometimes lash out in ways that hurt even those they claim to love. That night, after the children were asleep, Dom initiated the final preparations for their potential relocation. The FBI visit, while manageable, signaled an escalation that couldn't be ignored. If Vivian was willing to use federal agents as pawns in her desperation, there was no telling what Carlisle might resort to as his empire continued to crumble. As Dom worked through contingencies and evacuation routes, his secure phone lit up with a message from an automated alert system he'd established to monitor communications regarding the Palmer family. The message contained a single news alert. Breaking: Preston Palmer found dead in Manhattan apartment. Apparent suicide. Chapter 6. Dominoes Falling. Preston Palmer's death changed everything. What had been a methodical dismantling of the Palmer financial empire suddenly accelerated into chaos. Media coverage, already intense due to the financial crimes investigation, exploded into a frenzy of speculation and sensationalism. Preston's suicide note, leaked to reporters within hours, contained vague allegations about coercion and threats, stoking theories that range from organized crime connections to government conspiracies. Dom, monitoring developments from the Montana ranch, recognized both opportunity and danger in this unexpected development. Preston's death removed a key player in the legal proceedings, potentially limiting the evidence trail Dom had carefully constructed. But it also created a vacuum that would force the remaining Palmers to realign their defenses, exposing new vulnerabilities. Is Uncle Preston really dead? Lena asked at breakfast the morning after the news broke. The children, despite their physical isolation, had picked up on Dom's heightened vigilance. Yes, Dom confirmed, seeing no benefit in shielding them from reality. He took his own life. Because of the criminal stuff? Maddox pushed his cereal around the bowl without eating. That was likely a factor, Dom acknowledged. People in his position sometimes see no way forward when their actions are exposed. Will Mom be okay? Lena's question contained complexity beyond her years, concern mixed with wariness, the natural empathy of a child tempered by months of processing her mother's betrayal. Dom chose his words carefully. Your mother will be affected by her brother's death. Yes. But she has the Palmer family supporting her. They take care of their own. What Dom didn't share was his assessment of how Preston's suicide would impact the larger strategy. With the most vulnerable target removed, attention would shift to Carlisle and Vivian. The elder Palmer, already weakened by his stroke and the public disgrace of his son's crimes, would likely retreat further from public view, leaving Vivian as the family's primary representative in both legal proceedings and public perception. This shift presented both challenges and opportunities. Vivian, unlike Preston, had cultivated a public image of maternal devotion alongside her professional accomplishments. She would leverage this perception in the custody battle, positioning herself as the stable, loving parent against Dom's dangerous instability, a narrative already taking shape in her legal filings. 3 days after Preston's death, the anticipated counterattack began. Lena, using the secure phone Dom had provided, forwarded a message she'd received on her school email account, apparently overlooked when the Palmers had restricted the children's communications. Lena, this is Mom. I know you must be confused and scared right now. The things your father has told you about me aren't true. He's not well, sweetie. The doctors call it PTSD from his time in the military. It makes him paranoid, makes him see enemies everywhere. I never betrayed him. I never stole anything. I was trying to protect you both from his increasingly erratic behavior. Please, if you can safely do so, call this number. I can send people to help you. I love you so much. Mom. Dom read the message with clinical detachment, analyzing its construction rather than reacting to its content. The appeal to the child's fear and confusion. The medical explanation for his behavior. The specific denial of the exact charges he'd presented as evidence. The offer of rescue, without specifics on how that would be accomplished. Did you answer her? He asked Lena, keeping his voice neutral. No. Lena's expression was troubled, but resolute. I know what she's doing. And what's that? Dom probed, curious about his daughter's perception. She's trying to make me doubt you, Lena said simply. Like she always did, telling me you were too strict, Too controlling that normal dads didn't have so many rules about safety and stuff. Dom absorbed this insight, a confirmation of dynamics he had suspected but never directly observed. Your mother and I had different perspectives on many things, he said carefully, including parenting. She got a similar message. Maddox interjected, indicating his sister. But I deleted it without reading past the first line. I don't need to hear her lies. Dom studied his son, concerned by the hardening he observed, a reflection of his own transformation that brought both pride and unease. It's important to understand what she's doing without letting it affect you emotionally, he advised. Information is valuable, even when it's manipulative. The children's intercepted messages proved to be merely the opening salvo. The next day, Leona forwarded court documents showing Vivian had filed for emergency modification of the custody arrangement, citing new evidence of psychological instability and claiming the children were being held in isolation consistent with paranoid delusion patterns. Accompanying the filing were affidavits from 3 mental health professionals who had never personally evaluated Dom, but offered opinions based on behavior patterns described by Vivian. Most damaging was a statement from Dom's former business partner, Craig Hoffman, claiming Dom had exhibited increasing paranoia and obsessive behavior in the months before his disappearance. Craig sold out. Dom observed to Leona during their secure call. I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed. He claims Vivian showed him bank records proving you were siphoning client funds, Leona reported. Says he kept quiet out of loyalty until he realized the children might be at risk. Convenient timing, Dom noted. Right after Preston's death removes their primary fall guy. They're repositioning, Leona agreed, making you the unstable element while Vivian plays grieving sister and concerned mother. As expected, Dom had anticipated this maneuver, if not its specific form, and the judge, concerned enough to schedule an emergency hearing. Leona's voice contained the professional neutrality that had made her such an effective attorney. They're pushing for court-appointed psychologists to evaluate both you and the children. Timeline: hearing is next Tuesday. If granted, evaluations will be scheduled immediately thereafter. Dom processed this information, calculating its impact on his broader strategy. And if we don't appear for the hearing? Leona's silence conveyed her concern more effectively than words. Finally, she said, that would validate their claims, Dom. The judge would likely issue emergency orders giving Vivian temporary custody, possibly with law enforcement authorized to retrieve the children. After ending the call, Dom sat alone on the porch, watching as Maddox and Lena worked on their homeschool science project by the stream. The tactical part of his mind, the operator who had navigated combat zones and high-risk security scenarios, calculated options and contingencies. The father in him watched his children with an ache that no strategic analysis could resolve. The legal approach Vivian had chosen was clever, attacking not his moral character, but his mental stability. Any aggressive countermeasure would simply reinforce the narrative of a man driven by paranoia and delusion. Even the evidence he had compiled against the Palmers could be reframed as the product of obsession rather than investigation. That night, Dom made his decision. They would not run, not yet. Instead, they would appear at the hearing, presenting the image of a stable, functioning family unit. Dom would submit to psychological evaluation, confident that his military training would allow him to navigate the assessment without revealing the full scope of his ongoing operations against the Palmer family. The next morning, he gathered the children for another difficult conversation. We need to go back to civilization for a while, he explained, watching their reactions carefully. There's a court hearing about your custody. Mom's trying to take us away again, Maddox said. Not a question, but a statement loaded with teenage contempt. She's pursuing legal channels this time, Dom confirmed, which means we need to respond through those same channels. What if they make us go with her? Lena's voice was small but steady. That won't happen, Dom assured her with a certainty he didn't entirely feel. But we need to follow the legal process carefully. That means being respectful in court, answering questions honestly but thoughtfully. You want us to pretend everything's normal, Maddox interpreted, his perception sometimes startling in its accuracy. to show we're not being held hostage or whatever mom's claiming. Not pretend, Dom corrected. Just be yourselves. You're both intelligent, thoughtful people who understand more than most adults give you credit for. Let that show. 3 days later, they left the ranch in a convoy of 3 vehicles, security precautions arranged through Raul's connections. They drove to Bozeman, where a private plane waited to take them to New York. Throughout the journey, Dom maintained hypervigilance, scanning for surveillance or pursuit, while outwardly projecting calm confidence for the children's benefit. In New York, they checked into a suite at an upscale hotel near the courthouse, a deliberate choice to counter narratives about isolation and instability. Dom arranged for the children to meet with child advocacy lawyers independent from either his or Vivian's legal teams, ensuring they had representation focused solely on their interests. The night before the hearing, as the children slept in the suite's second bedroom, Dom received an unexpected message on his secure line. Need to meet. Plaza Hotel Bar. 10 p.m. Come alone. E. Elizabeth Palmer, Vivian's mother, and the key witness whose testimony had secured Dom's initial custody victory. The woman who had warned him about Carlisle's extra-legal efforts to locate them. Dom weighed the risks. The message had come through channels only Elizabeth should have access to. The plaza was public enough to discourage a trap, private enough for a confidential conversation. After arranging additional security for the children, Dom made his way to the landmark hotel. Elizabeth Palmer sat alone at a corner table, a barely touched martini before her. At 68, she retained the aristocratic beauty that had once made her a fixture in society pages, but recent months had etched new lines around her eyes and mouth. When she saw Dom approach, something flickered across her face. Not fear, exactly, but wary respect. "You came," she said as he sat across from her. "I wasn't sure you would. You took a risk contacting me," Dom replied, scanning their surroundings with practiced subtlety. "I assumed it was important." Elizabeth took a small sip of her drink. Carlisle suffered another stroke yesterday. More severe this time. The doctors aren't optimistic. Dom absorbed this information, assessing its strategic implications. "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you?" Elizabeth's gaze was direct, challenging. "He was preparing to destroy you, by any means necessary." "I don't celebrate anyone's suffering," Dom said truthfully. "Even my enemies." Elizabeth studied him with the shrewd assessment of a woman who had navigated high society politics for decades. "You're not what I expected, even now. Vivian always described you as rigid, unyielding. In certain matters, I am." Dom maintained eye contact. "Why did you ask to meet, Elizabeth?" She reached into her handbag, removing a sealed envelope which she slid across the table. Preston's Real suicide note, not the version released to the press. Dom made no move to touch it. "How did you get this?" "I was the one who found him," Elizabeth said, her composure wavering slightly. "Before anyone else arrived, before the police were called. He had 2 letters prepared, one for public consumption, one for family. And you're giving this to me because I'm tired, Dominic." For the first time, real emotion cracked through Elizabeth's carefully maintained facade. "Tired of the lies. Tired of watching my family destroy itself and everyone around it. Preston is dead. Carlisle is dying. Vivian is..." She paused. "Vivian is becoming something I don't recognize." Dom finally took the envelope, securing it in his jacket pocket without opening it. "What's in this that you think I need to know?" "The truth about why he did it," Elizabeth said simply, "and about who was really behind the financial manipulations. It wasn't just Preston. It was never just Preston. Carlisle," Dom suggested, watching her reaction. "Among others." Elizabeth finished her martini in a single swallow. "Read it yourself. Use it however you see fit. The children deserve to know the truth about their heritage. All of it, not just the sanitized version we present to the world." "Why now?" Dom pressed, still wary of manipulation. "You could have come forward with this information months ago. Because tomorrow, in that courtroom, Vivian will present herself as the grieving sister, the devoted mother, the woman victimized by her unstable husband." Elizabeth's eyes, so like her daughter's, held Dom's with surprising intensity. And I can't bear to watch another Palmer lie destroy more lives. After Elizabeth departed, Dom remained at the table, processing this unexpected development. The letter in his pocket represented either a genuine breakthrough or an elaborate trap, perhaps both simultaneously. The Palmers had demonstrated remarkable adaptability in their counterattacks, evolving their strategy as each previous approach failed. Back at the hotel, with the children still sleeping, Dom carefully examined Preston's letter before reading it. The paper, the handwriting, the Palmer family crest watermarked in the stationery, all consistent with Preston's known habits. The content, once Dom began reading, painted a devastating picture of a family built on generational deception. Preston described how Carlyle had initiated him into financial manipulation as a teenager, teaching him to view regulations as obstacles for common people rather than actual constraints. He detailed how the Palmer fortune had been built not on brilliant investment strategy, but on systematized insider trading, blackmail, and strategic ruination of competitors. Most damaging was his description of Vivian's role. Not an unwitting accomplice, but an architect of some of their most legally questionable structures, using her law background to identify and exploit loopholes. She was always the smartest of us, Preston wrote in his flowing script. Father recognized it before I did. While I was the public face, Viv designed the mechanisms that kept us untouchable. The children were her blind spot. She truly believes they belong in the Palmer fold, continuing the legacy. She'll sacrifice anything, even you, even her own integrity, to ensure they're raised as true Palmers. The letter concluded with something unexpected, a paragraph addressed directly to Dom. Russo, I know you'll see this eventually. Elizabeth will make sure of it. You were right about everything, though not for the reasons you think. We didn't target you because you weren't good enough for Vivian. We targeted you because you were dangerous, a man with an unshakable moral code in a family built on shifting principles. I hope you protect those children from becoming what we've become. Some bloodlines shouldn't continue. Dom secured the letter in the hotel safe, then spent hours recalibrating his strategy for the hearing. Preston's testimony from beyond the grave, if it could be authenticated and admitted, changed the battlefield entirely. No longer would Dom be fighting defensive action against accusations of instability. Now he had the means to expose the true nature of the family seeking custody of his children. The next morning, as they prepared to leave for the courthouse, Dom gathered Maddox and Lena for a final conversation before facing Vivian and the remaining Palmers. Today will be difficult, he told them, maintaining eye contact with each in turn. You'll hear things about me, about your mother, about your family that might be confusing or upsetting. We already know Mom's going to lie about you, Maddox said with the certainty of adolescence. It's more complicated than just lies, Dom corrected gently. There are different versions of truth, different perspectives on the same events. Are you going to tell them about the money? Lena asked. About what Mom and Uncle Preston did? Dom considered the question carefully. I'm going to present facts, supported by evidence. What happens after that depends on many factors outside our control. But we get to decide where we live, right? Maddox pressed. They can't force us to go with her. The judge will consider your preferences, Dom confirmed. But ultimately, the court decides based on what they believe is in your best interest. As they rode to the courthouse in a private car, Dom observed the children's responses to mounting pressure. Maddox increasingly withdrawn and stoic, Lena hypervigilant and analytical. Different coping mechanisms, but both demonstrating resilience that filled him with pride, tinged with regret. They shouldn't have to navigate this complex adult battlefield, shouldn't have to choose between parents or assess competing truths. At the courthouse, they were immediately separated, the children taken to meet with their independent advocates. Dom escorted to a conference room where Leona waited with their legal team. The hearing itself would be closed, the records sealed to protect the children's privacy, but news cameras clustered outside the building suggested the case had attracted significant media attention. Vivian arrived 20 minutes ago, Leona reported, with Elizabeth surprisingly. No sign of Carlyle. Presumably he's still hospitalized. Dom nodded, processing this information. Elizabeth gave me something last night that changes our approach. He briefed Leona on Preston's real suicide note, watching her expression shift from skepticism to calculated assessment. If authenticated, this is game-changing, she acknowledged, but also risky. Introducing it without warning could appear tactical rather than truthful. That's why I want you to provide copies to Vivian's attorneys before the hearing, Dom decided. No ambushes. Let them know we're prepared to submit it for forensic analysis to confirm authenticity. As Leona departed to implement this strategy, Dom prepared himself mentally for the confrontation to come. He would see Vivian for the first time in over a year. The woman who had shared his bed, borne his children, and systematically betrayed everything they had built together. The tactical operator in him viewed her as an adversary to be countered. The husband who had once loved her experienced more complex emotions. When they finally entered the courtroom, Dom maintained his focus on the judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s with a reputation for prioritizing children's welfare over parental preferences. He deliberately avoided looking at Vivian until the proceedings formally began, denying her the opportunity to gauge his emotional state. When he finally allowed himself to look at his estranged wife, Dom was struck by how little she had changed physically while seeming fundamentally transformed. The same elegant features, the same poised posture, but her eyes held a calculation that he now recognized had always been there, merely concealed behind affection he had mistaken for genuine. The hearing proceeded with structured formality. Vivian's attorneys presented their case first. A carefully constructed narrative of a devoted mother separated from her children by an increasingly paranoid husband suffering from undiagnosed post-traumatic stress. They introduced affidavits from colleagues describing Dom's obsessive security measures and disproportionate responses to perceived threats. They presented financial experts questioning the legitimacy of Dom's business dealings, suggesting his accusations against the Palmers were projections of his own financial improprieties. Throughout this presentation, Dom maintained neutral composure, neither reacting defensively nor displaying the anger that might reinforce their narrative. When his own legal team's turn came, they methodically dismantled each accusation with documented evidence. Military psychological evaluations showing Dom had successfully completed PTSD treatment years before, financial audits confirming the legitimacy of his business operations, testimony from clients praising his professional judgment. Then came the pivot point, Preston's letter. When introduced into evidence, it created the exact disruption Dom had anticipated. Vivian's controlled facade cracked momentarily, her eyes darting to her mother with a mixture of shock and accusation. Elizabeth, seated behind the attorneys, maintained regal composure, her expression revealing nothing. The judge called a recess to review the new evidence, leaving the parties to marinate in the shifting dynamics. Dom, rather than engaging with Vivian directly, focused on reassuring the children, who had been brought in for brief testimony before being escorted back to their advocates. When proceedings resumed, the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The judge, after reviewing Preston's letter and hearing arguments regarding its authenticity, ordered a comprehensive investigation into its claims before making any custody determination. In the interim, she maintained the status quo. Dom would retain primary custody, with Vivian granted supervised visitation. As they prepared to leave the courtroom, Vivian finally approached Dom directly, her voice low and tight with controlled fury. "You think you've won," she said, maintaining a smile for any observing eyes. "But you have no idea what you've started." Dom met her gaze without hostility. "This isn't about winning, Vivian. It's about truth." "Truth?" She nearly laughed. "You disappeared for months, took our children to the wilderness, and systematically destroyed my family's reputation. And you talk about truth?" "I learned from the best," Dom replied quietly. "Isn't that what Preston's letter revealed? The systematic Palmer approach to removing obstacles." Something flashed in Vivian's eyes. Not guilt or shame, but a cold recognition. "Those children are Palmer's too, Dom. No matter how far you take them, no matter what stories you tell them about me, they carry our blood. Remember that." As she turned to leave, Dom spoke one final time, Blood isn't destiny, Viv. Choices. Outside the courthouse, as they navigated through reporters to their waiting car, Dom maintained a protective formation around the children, shielding them from cameras and questions. Only when they were safely inside the vehicle did he allow himself to process what had transpired. Not a conclusive victory, but a significant shift in momentum. The judge's investigation into Preston's claims would expose exactly what Dom had been working toward for over a year: the systematic dismantling of the Palmer family's carefully constructed facade. The financial empire built on manipulation. The social standing maintained through strategic relationships rather than actual integrity. The generational pattern of viewing rules as applicable to others but not themselves. As they drove away from the courthouse, Maddox broke the silence. "Mom looked different." "People change," Dom said simply. "Sometimes from the inside out." "Is Grandpa really dying?" Lena asked, having overheard discussions of Carlisle's condition. "It seems so," Dom confirmed, seeing no benefit in shielding them from this reality. "Are we going back to Montana now?" Maddox's question contained equal parts hope and wariness. Dom considered their position carefully. The hearing had gone as well as could be expected, but Vivian's parting words contained a threat he couldn't dismiss. The Palmer resources might be diminished, but were far from exhausted. Carlisle's illness might have removed him as an active opponent, but Vivian had demonstrated she was perhaps the most dangerous Palmer of all, the one who could present a convincing facade of normalcy while orchestrating systematic destruction. Not immediately, he decided. We have some things to finish here first. What Dom didn't share with the children was his recognition that they had reached a critical juncture. The systematic dismantling of the Palmer Empire was proceeding according to plan, but now faced an unexpected variable. Vivian operating without the constraints of either her father's caution or her brother's impulsivity. She was, as Preston had written, the smartest of the Palmers, and now she was focused entirely on reclaiming her children and rebuilding what Dom had destroyed. The end game was approaching, but not in the form Dom had originally anticipated. What had begun as calculated retribution had evolved into something more complex. A battle not just for justice or even custody, but for the very narrative that would shape his children's understanding of family, loyalty, and truth. As they returned to the hotel, Dom initiated the next phase of his contingency planning. Not a retreat, but a strategic repositioning. The final confrontation with what remained of the Palmer dynasty wouldn't be in courtrooms or financial institutions, but in the arena Vivian understood best, the court of public opinion and social perception. For that battlefield, Dom had been preparing longer than anyone realized. Chapter 7. Unmasking. The weeks following the courtroom confrontation unfolded like a strategic chess match, with Dom and Vivian making calculated moves while the Palmer family legacy continued its public disintegration. Carlisle Palmer, patriarch and architect of the family's fortunes, died quietly in his sleep 3 days after the hearing, a development that accelerated both the legal proceedings and Vivian's increasingly desperate countermeasures. For Dom, Carlisle's death represented both tactical advantage and unexpected complexity. The elder Palmer had been a formidable opponent, but also a predictable one. His strategies, rooted in old-world power dynamics Dom had studied extensively. Vivian, now effectively the head of what remained of the Palmer dynasty, operated with a modern flexibility that required constant vigilance. She's liquidating assets faster than our monitoring can track, Leona reported during one of their secure briefings. Converting to cryptocurrency, routing through entities established in the past 6 months. She's preparing for something. Dom had anticipated this. The judge's investigation into Preston's claims is gaining traction. She's insulating whatever resources she can before the hammer falls. It's more than that, Leona countered, sliding a tablet across the table. Look at these property acquisitions, all within a 100-mile radius of your Montana ranch, all through different shell companies, but following the same formation pattern. Dom studied the information, recognizing the implication immediately. She's establishing operational proximity. Exactly. Leona's expression reflected professional concern rather than personal alarm. Not for a legal challenge, but for something else. something requiring physical presence. Dom had maintained the children in New York following the hearing, ostensibly to facilitate the court-ordered psychological evaluations and to allow the supervised visitation with Vivian the judge had mandated. The real reason was strategic, keeping them in an environment where security could be tightly controlled, where Dom's contacts could monitor all approaches. The first visitation with Vivian had been stilted, conducted in a neutral facility with court-appointed observers present. Maddox had maintained rigid formality throughout, answering direct questions but volunteering nothing. Lena, despite her initial determination to remain equally distant, had slowly engaged with her mother over the course of the 2-hour session. Not with warmth, but with careful assessment that reminded Dom painfully of his own interrogation techniques. She kept asking about Montana, Lena reported afterward as they drove back to the hotel. Not directly, but like, what we did there were exactly it was stuff about the house. Intelligence gathering, Dom explained, careful to maintain a neutral tone despite his internal alerts. It's natural she be curious about where you've been living. It didn't feel natural, Maddox interjected from the back seat. It felt like she was checking off boxes on a list, making sure we weren't, like, living in a bunker with guns, or whatever she told the judge. Dom recognized the tactical acuity in his son's assessment. Vivian was collecting information not just out of maternal concern, but for operational planning. The property acquisitions Leona had identified suddenly took on greater significance in this context. That night, after the children were asleep, Dom initiated the next phase of his contingency planning. Using secure communications, he contacted Raul to activate preparations at 3 separate locations, none of them the Montana ranch. If Vivian was establishing operational presence near the ranch, Dom would ensure neither he nor the children were anywhere near her sphere of influence when she made her move. The court-ordered psychological evaluations proceeded over the following days, with both Dom and the children meeting separately with experts appointed to assess their mental and emotional well-being. Dom navigated these sessions with the same discipline he'd applied in military psychological screenings, truthful but measured, revealing enough to establish credibility while maintaining appropriate boundaries. When the preliminary findings were submitted to the court, they largely validated Dom's position. The children were well-adjusted despite their unusual circumstances, showing no signs of the psychological distress or manipulation Vivian's attorneys had alleged. Dom himself was deemed to have appropriate psychological function with expected adaptive responses to perceived threats to family security. This professional validation should have represented a significant victory. Instead, it triggered Vivian's most aggressive countermove yet. The morning after the evaluation findings were filed, Dom's security protocols alerted him to unusual online activity, a coordinated release of information across multiple platforms simultaneously. News sites, social media channels, and legal blogs all carried variations of the same story. Palmer widow releases evidence of ex-military husband's dangerous paranoia. The material Vivian had released was calculated for maximum damage. Selected fragments of Dom's private journals from his early post-military years, sections of security planning documents from his consulting business, and most damaging, edited recordings of conversations with the children discussing escape protocols and security measures at the Montana ranch. Presented without context, curated to support a specific narrative, the materials painted a picture of a man obsessed with perceived threats and conspiracies, imposing quasi-military discipline on children too young to resist. What the releases carefully omitted was the professional context of the security documents, the therapeutic purpose of the journals, and the full conversations with the children that would have revealed their understanding and participation in what were essentially advanced safety protocols. She's playing to public perception now, Leona observed as they reviewed the damage assessment in their secure office, creating a narrative that will influence the judge regardless of the professional evaluations. Using the children as props, Dom added, his voice containing a controlled edge that those who knew him recognized as profound anger. Those recordings were made during legitimate safety drills after we received specific threats. The most concerning aspect wasn't the public relations damage. Dom had never cared much for external perception, but the operational security breached the releases represented. The level of detail in some of the materials suggested access to systems that should have been secure, implying either sophisticated technical penetration or human intelligence Dom had failed to identify. As they developed a counter-strategy, Dom received an unexpected call from Elizabeth Palmer. Since providing Preston's suicide letter, Vivian's mother had maintained distance from both parties in the conflict, attending Carlisle's funeral with dignified reserve and making no public statements about the ongoing legal proceedings. "She's gone too far," Elizabeth said without preamble when Dom answered. "Using the children this way crosses a line even Carlisle would have respected. I'm handling it," Dom replied, neither confirming nor denying any specific response to Vivian's maneuver. "You don't understand," Elizabeth continued, an urgency in her voice Dom hadn't heard before. "This isn't just about custody anymore. Vivian is unstable. Carlisle's death, Preston's suicide, the financial collapse, it's broken something in her. She's talking about purging weakness from the bloodline and rebuilding from pure foundation." Dom processed this information, fitting it into the tactical picture forming in his mind. When did this shift begin? After the hearing. After Preston's letter was revealed. Elizabeth's voice dropped. "She believes you've corrupted her children with common values that need to be remediated." Those are her exact words, Dominic. "I've heard her discussing treatments, specialized schools, even medications to make them more compliant." A cold focus settled over Dom. The same clarity he had experienced in combat situations when objectives suddenly became crystalline in their simplicity. "Where is she now?" "At the Riverside House, preparing for the memorial service tomorrow." Elizabeth paused. "She has people with her. Not family. Not the usual security. Different people." "Thank you for the information," Dom said, already calculating response scenarios. "Stay away from the house tonight, Elizabeth." After ending the call, Dom initiated immediate extraction protocols for the children. Whatever Vivian was planning, whatever resources she had mobilized, the current location was now compromised. Within an hour, Maddox and Lena were secured in a secondary safe house in Connecticut, protected by Raoul and two other former military operators Dom trusted implicitly. With the children secured, Dom focused on countering Vivian's information operation. Rather than engaging in point-by-point rebuttals, which would only extend the narrative she had created, he opted for a comprehensive disclosure strategy, releasing complete, unedited versions of all materials Vivian had selectively leaked, providing full context for each document and recording. Most powerful was the complete audio of the security drills, where the children could be heard asking thoughtful questions, suggesting improvements to protocols, and even joking about Dad's safety obsession, with the comfortable familiarity of a family routine rather than the fearful compliance Vivian's edits had suggested. By midnight, the counter-narrative was gaining traction in specific influential circles. Legal commentators noting the manipulative editing of the original releases, security professionals validating the legitimacy of Dom's protocols, child development experts observing the healthy parent-child dynamics evident in the complete recordings. But Dom recognized this information battle was merely a distraction from Vivian's true objective. Elizabeth's warning about people with her, not the usual security, aligned too perfectly with the property acquisitions near the Montana ranch. Vivian wasn't just fighting a public relations war. She was preparing for an operation. The realization crystallized Dom's next move. Instead of continuing to react defensively, he would force Vivian to reveal her hand by presenting a target too tempting to ignore. "I need to go to Montana," he informed Leona. "Alone. Make sure it's known that I'm heading there to secure additional documentation for the court." Leona studied him with the shrewd assessment of someone who recognized a tactical play. "You're setting yourself up as bait. I'm creating a scenario where Vivian's true intentions will become undeniable to the court," Dom corrected. "If she's planning what I think she is, this ends now." "And if you're wrong?" Leona challenged. "If this is exactly what she wants you to do, then I'll adapt accordingly," Dom replied with the confidence of a man who had navigated far more dangerous scenarios. "But I'm not wrong. Vivian has always had one consistent weakness. She believes her intelligence makes her unpredictable. The next morning, Dom boarded a commercial flight to Montana, making no effort to conceal his travel plans. Through carefully placed information, he ensured Vivian's network would be aware that he was traveling without the children, that he planned to spend only 48 hours at the ranch retrieving materials for the ongoing court case. What wasn't shared through these channels was the extensive preparation Dom had implemented at the ranch during the previous week. Security upgrades, surveillance systems, and contingency measures that transformed the property from a family residence to an operational environment designed specifically to document whatever Vivian was planning. The ranch appeared exactly as they had left it months earlier, a deliberate preservation that would make it difficult for anyone to determine whether the property was regularly occupied. Dom maintained normal activity patterns for the first 24 hours, providing predictable behavioral data for anyone conducting surveillance. On the second night, the perimeter sensors activated shortly after midnight. 3 vehicles approaching from different access points, coordinating their movements. Not Vivian's usual security detail, as Elizabeth had warned, but a different caliber of operator altogether. Dom, already positioned in a concealed observation post 200 yards from the main house, watched through military-grade night vision as the team established a perimeter, communicated through hand signals, and began a systematic approach to the house. Their movements were disciplined, their equipment non-standard. Not law enforcement, not military, but private operators with extensive training. When they breached the house, Dom activated the interior surveillance system remotely, capturing every movement as the team searched room by room with efficient thoroughness. Their communications, intercepted through the house's security system, confirmed what Dom had suspected. Eagle's nest clear. No sign of primary or secondary targets. Package 1 not on site. Proceed to contingency. Negative. Hold position. Falcon approaching. Dom recognized the structure immediately. An extraction operation using standard call signs for targets. Primary and secondary targets would be the children. Eagle's nest was clearly the house. And Falcon, that would be Vivian herself, arriving to confirm the situation before proceeding to whatever contingency plan they had prepared. When a 4th vehicle arrived 30 minutes later, Dom wasn't surprised to see Vivian emerge, dressed in practical dark clothing rather than her usual elegant attire. She entered the house with the confidence of someone who believed herself in complete control of the situation, unaware that every movement was being recorded from multiple angles, every word captured by systems designed for precisely this scenario. Inside, Vivian conducted her own inspection of the house, paying particular attention to the children's rooms, examining personal items with a coldness that contradicted her public persona of the desperate mother seeking reunion with her beloved children. No recent occupation, she said to the team leader who accompanied her. But they've been stockpiling here, medications, preserved food, emergency supplies in the basement. Consistent with the psychological profile, the man agreed, preparing for extended isolation. Where would he take them next? Vivian moved to Dom's office, accessing his computer with a password that should have been unknown to her, revealing another security breach Dom had suspected but not confirmed until this moment. He has property in Idaho, she said, navigating through files Dom had deliberately left accessible. A cabin near the Bitterroot Mountains, completely off-grid. That's most likely where they'd go if they felt compromised here. Timeline for extraction? The team leader asked, his tone suggesting this was an operation that had been extensively planned. 24 hours, Vivian decided. Let the court proceedings continue as scheduled. Once we have the children secured at the wellness facility, the legal questions become irrelevant. The treatment team will document whatever psychological conditions we need to justify emergency intervention. And the father? The question hung in the air, laden with implications. Vivian's expression hardened into something unrecognizable to anyone who knew only her public face. Non-essential to the operation. If he interferes, handle it appropriately. The children are what matter. The Palmer bloodline continues through them. Dom had heard enough. The surveillance was capturing everything, creating an unimpeachable record of conspiracy that no court could ignore. Vivian had moved beyond legal maneuvering into something far darker, planning what amounted to kidnapping under the guise of medical intervention, with a casual disregard for Dom's continued existence that suggested outcomes he had anticipated but hoped wouldn't materialize. He maintained his position as the team completed their reconnaissance of the property, establishing surveillance points and discussing extraction routes. Only after they departed, Vivian with them, did Dom return to the house to retrieve the surveillance recordings and initiate the final phase of his response. By morning, the evidence was secured and transmitted to multiple redundant locations, ensuring no single point of failure could prevent its eventual disclosure. Dom then contacted Leona, briefing her on the developments and instructing her to prepare emergency filings with the court. This goes beyond custody issues, he explained as he drove toward the private airstrip where transportation waited. She's planning an extrajudicial extraction using private contractors, with documentation falsification to cover the abduction. The judge will issue emergency orders, Leona confirmed. But enforcement requires knowing where Vivian is, where she's planning to take the children. The wellness facility she mentioned, Dom said, start with medical facilities associated with Palmer family donations. Look for recently established behavioral treatment centers, particularly those with limited public footprints. As Dom boarded the waiting plane, he received confirmation that the children remained secure at the Connecticut safe house, with additional security measures implemented based on the intelligence gathered at the ranch. The tactical picture was clarifying. Vivian believed the children were either at the Montana ranch or the Idaho property she had discovered in Dom's files. Both locations were now under surveillance by her contracted team, their resources divided precisely as Dom had intended. The Idaho cabin was a fabrication, a false flag location created months earlier as a contingency against exactly this type of intelligence penetration. Vivian's team would find a property that appeared to match their intelligence, complete with subtle indications of recent occupation, but no actual connection to Dom or the children. While her resources focused on these decoy locations, Dom implemented the final phase of his response. Not a defensive retreat, but a decisive counteroffensive designed to end the conflict permanently. The plane landed not in New York or Connecticut, but in Boston, where a very specific legal proceeding had been quietly prepared over the previous months. Not a custody hearing or financial litigation, but a federal deposition related to ongoing investigations into the Palmer financial empire, an investigation Dom had been secretly cooperating with since before his initial disappearance. In a secure federal building, Dom provided testimony under oath about everything he had witnessed and documented: the systematic financial crimes, the manipulation of accounts, the pressure tactics applied to critics and whistleblowers. Most crucially, he supplied the unedited surveillance footage from the previous night, showing Vivian planning what amounted to criminal conspiracy. By the time Vivian realized her tactical error, dividing her resources between decoy locations while the real action unfolded in an entirely different arena, federal agents were already executing search warrants at the wellness facility she had prepared for the children's treatment. What they discovered there transformed the narrative completely. A private medical facility staffed by practitioners with questionable credentials, documentation prepared for behavioral modification protocols that bordered on abusive, and most damning, medication regimens prepared specifically for Maddox and Lena that included powerful psychotropic drugs with no legitimate therapeutic purpose for children their age. The evidence was irrefutable, the legal consequences immediate. Vivian Palmer was taken into federal custody not for financial crimes or custody violations, but for conspiracy to commit multiple felonies against her own children. The private contractors she had hired scattered at the first sign of federal involvement, but their identities, meticulously documented through Dom surveillance, ensured most would eventually face their own legal consequences. For Dom, watching the collapse of Vivian's final desperate gambit brought not satisfaction, but a weary relief. The children were safe. The threat was neutralized. The battle that had consumed nearly 2 years of their lives was effectively over. When he finally returned to the safe house in Connecticut, Dom found Maddox and Lena waiting with a resilience that both inspired and saddened him. Children who had been forced to develop adult awareness far too early, who understood concepts of security and betrayal no child should comprehend. "Is it really over?" Lena asked as they sat together in the safe house living room. The perimeter secured by Raul's team, while federal marshals established additional protection nearby. "The immediate threat is," Dom confirmed, maintaining his policy of age-appropriate honesty. "Your mother is in custody. The people she hired have dispersed. The legal system is now fully engaged with all the evidence." "Will she go to prison?" Maddox's question contained complex emotions: concern, anger, a son's instinctive protectiveness despite everything that had happened. "That's likely," Dom acknowledged. "The evidence is substantial, and not just about what she planned for you both. The financial crimes alone carry significant penalties." "What happens to us now?" Lena asked the question that mattered most: the future beyond the immediate tactical situation. Dom took a moment before answering, recognizing the weight of this transition point. They had been operating in crisis mode for so long that the prospect of normal life seemed almost foreign. "Now we rebuild," he said finally. "Not in Montana. That chapter is closed. Somewhere new, where we can establish ourselves without the shadow of the past hanging over us. Just the three of us," Maddox clarified, something vulnerable beneath his teenage attempt at casual inquiry. "Just us," Dom confirmed. "Family. The real kind, built on trust and truth, not bloodlines and obligations." As night fell over the safe house, Dom watched his children sleep with a hypervigilance that had become second nature, alert to threats, but also to the subtle indicators of their emotional state. Maddox's posture had relaxed for the first time in months, his usual defensive tension eased by the knowledge that the immediate danger had passed. Lena, always the more overtly sensitive of the two, had fallen asleep clutching the childhood stuffed animal she had pretended to outgrow years earlier, but had insisted on bringing to each safe location. In the quiet darkness, Dom allowed himself to process what they had all endured, not just the tactical challenges and security threats, but the profound betrayal at the heart of it all. Vivian had not merely violated their marriage vows or financial trust. She had been willing to sacrifice their children's well-being to preserve a corrupt family legacy. The Palmer definition of family, bloodlines and appearances, power and position, had ultimately revealed itself as hollow, destructive, and fundamentally unsustainable. The path forward would not be simple. The children would need support processing their mother's betrayal and eventual imprisonment. There would be ongoing legal proceedings, financial matters to resolve, new identities to establish in whatever community they chose to build their future. But for the first time since discovering Vivian's betrayal, Dom felt something like peace, not the absence of vigilance, but the presence of certainty. The immediate battle was won. Now came the longer war of rebuilding. Chapter 8. Scorched Earth. 6 months after Vivian's arrest, the Palmer legacy existed only in financial forensic reports and criminal case files. What had once been a dynasty spanning generations had collapsed with stunning totality, leaving behind shell corporations, frozen assets, and a trail of investigations that continued to uncover deeper layers of corruption. Dom had relocated with the children to coastal Oregon, a deliberate choice for its distance from both the Montana ranch and the Palmer sphere of influence on the East Coast. The property he purchased sat on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, its isolation providing security while its natural beauty offered something the children had lacked during the years of conflict: normalcy. "It's strange not having security perimeters anymore," Maddox observed one morning as they hiked along the coastal trail that connected their property to the nearest small town. At 16, he had grown 3 inches in the past year, his frame filling out with the dedicated physical training Dom had incorporated into their daily routine. "We still have security," Dom corrected gently. "Just less visible. The threats have changed, so our countermeasures adapt accordingly." The less visible security included state-of-the-art systems integrated throughout the property, regular check-ins from Raul, who had established a fishing charter business in a nearby harbor and a carefully maintained awareness of their surroundings that had become second nature to all three of them. Lena, walking ahead on the trail, paused to examine a tide pool. At 14, she maintained the perceptiveness that had been both burden and blessing during the conflict, but now directed it toward marine biology, a passion that had emerged during their coastal relocation. "Do you think Mom's appeal will work?" she asked without looking up from the starfish she was studying. The question, delivered with casual neutrality, belied its weight. Dom maintained his policy of direct honesty. "No, the evidence is too comprehensive, the charges too serious. The best outcome she can hope for is reduced sentencing in exchange for continued cooperation against remaining Palmer associates." Vivian's trial had concluded 3 months earlier with a 20-year sentence for crimes including conspiracy, fraud, and child endangerment. Her legal team had immediately filed appeals, focusing on procedural issues rather than challenging the fundamental evidence. The appeals process would likely continue for years, providing periodic reminders of a chapter Dom was determined to close definitively. Grandma Elizabeth called again. Maddox mentioned as they continued along the trail. Left another message about wanting to see us. Dom had established clear boundaries regarding contact with any remaining Palmer family members. Elizabeth, having cooperated with authorities and provided key testimony against both Carlisle and Vivian, had been spared prosecution but remained a complex figure in the family narrative, not directly responsible for the worst actions, but complicit through decades of silence. "That's your decision," Dom reminded his son. "I won't prevent contact if that's what you want." "I don't," Maddox said firmly. She knew what was happening. Maybe not everything, but enough. She only helped when it benefited her. Dom nodded, neither encouraging nor discouraging this assessment. The children's relationship with their maternal family was one area where he was determined to allow them complete agency, offering perspective when asked but never directing their conclusions. Back at the house, Dom received an update from Leona that would significantly impact their ongoing transition. The federal asset forfeiture process had concluded for the majority of Palmer holdings, with the court ruling that certain trusts, specifically those established for Maddox and Lena's education and future security, would be excluded from seizure based on Dom's documented non-involvement in the financial crimes. "It's substantial," Leona explained during their secure call. "Not the full Palmer fortune, obviously, but enough to ensure the children will never have financial concerns. College, graduate school, whatever path they choose. Clean money," Dom verified, unwilling to accept any resources tainted by the corruption he had spent years exposing. "Completely." The forensic accountants traced every dollar. These particular trusts were established with legitimate business proceeds, properly taxed and documented. Carlisle apparently maintained certain segments of the family fortune with absolute legitimacy, perhaps as insurance against exactly this scenario. The irony wasn't lost on Dom. Carlisle's paranoid contingency planning, intended to preserve some portion of the Palmer legacy against catastrophe, would now fund the futures of children being raised explicitly to reject Palmer values. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, a family ritual established in their new home, Dom shared the financial update with the children. Their reactions reflected how much they had matured through adversity. Not excitement about wealth, but thoughtful consideration of responsibility. "Does this mean we're Palmers again?" Lena asked, the question cutting to the heart of identity issues she had been processing with the therapist Dom had arranged for both children. "You've always been yourselves," Dom corrected. "Palmer's just a name. What matters is the values you choose to embody." "I don't want anything from them," Maddox declared, his stance on the Palmer connection consistently harder than his sister's. "They can keep their money. It's not about them," Dom explained. "This is money that would have been yours regardless, trusts established for your future. Accepting it doesn't mean accepting their values or actions." Later that night, after reviewing security protocols and checking the property perimeter, habits Dom maintained despite the reduced threat level, he sat alone on the cliffside deck, watching moonlight reflect off the Pacific. The past 2 years had transformed him in ways he was only beginning to recognize. The military discipline that had always been his foundation remained, but tempered now with a perspective forged through protecting what mattered most when all institutional supports had failed. His secure phone buzzed with a message from an anonymous number, a channel established for specific intelligence sources who prefer to remain unidentified even to him. Federal investigation expanding to Palmer political connections. Names emerging include 3 senators, 2 governors. Prepare for renewed media interest. Dom acknowledged the message with a predetermined code, then sat with the implications. The Palmer collapse was proving to be merely the visible portion of a much larger corruption network, exactly as he had anticipated when initiating his systematic exposure of their activities. The ripple effects would continue for years, potentially reaching the highest levels of power. For Dom personally, this escalation meant reevaluating security protocols and preparing the children for another wave of public attention. But strategically, it represented validation of his original assessment. The Palmers weren't isolated bad actors, but nodes in a system that rewarded appearance over substance, connection over integrity. The following morning brought confirmation of the anonymous tip. Breaking news reports detailing federal investigations into political figures with long-standing Palmer connections. Dom monitored the coverage while maintaining the family's normal routine, alert for any specific mentions that might require response. When the children left for their respective activities, Maddox for a local martial arts program Dom had carefully vetted, Lena for a marine biology workshop at the Coastal Research Center. He received an unexpected communication from a former military colleague, now working in federal law enforcement. "They're coming after you next," the message warned. "Not legally. They can't touch you there. But reputation, narrative control. Be prepared for engineered leaks about your military service, specifically Kandahar. They're trying to reframe everything as PTSD-driven paranoia." Dom had anticipated this counterattack, though not its specific focus. His service record contained classified operations that, selectively presented without context, could feed the narrative Vivian had attempted to establish before her arrest. Not illegal actions, but the kind of morally complex decisions required in combat zones where standard rules rarely applied. Rather than retreat into defensive posture, Dom decided on preemptive action. Through secure channels, he contacted key journalists who had reported accurately on the Palmer case, offering a comprehensive interview about his military service, the systematic dismantling of the Palmer empire, and the ongoing protection of his children. Full disclosure, he instructed Leona, who would coordinate the media engagement. No redactions, no spin. Just complete context for whatever they're planning to leak. The interview, conducted at a neutral location without the children present, became a turning point in the public narrative. Dom spoke with the direct clarity that had become his hallmark, acknowledging complex decisions from his military service while providing the contextual framework missing from the selective leaks that began appearing in less reputable outlets. War requires choices that look very different from the safety of civilian life. He explained to the Pulitzer-winning journalist who had covered the Palmer financial crimes from the beginning. "I've never claimed perfect judgment in every situation. What I do claim is consistency of purpose, protecting those who can't protect themselves, whether that's civilians in conflict zones or my own children facing systematic manipulation." When asked about Vivian specifically, Dom's response reflected neither vindictiveness nor forgiveness. Vivian made choices that prioritized a corrupt family legacy over our children's well-being. The consequences she's facing are the direct result of those choices, not any action I took against her personally. I didn't destroy the Palmer empire. I simply exposed its true nature and allowed the legal system to function as intended. The interview, published simultaneously across multiple platforms, effectively neutralized the attempted character assassination. More significantly, it shifted public perception of the entire Palmer case from a personal family drama to what it truly represented: the exposure of systemic corruption that had operated unchecked for generations. As public attention intensified around the political dimensions of the Palmer connections, Dom maintained rigorous focus on the family's security and stability. The children, despite their remarkable resilience, still experience periods of struggle with their mother's actions and ongoing absence. "Do you ever miss Mom?" Lena asked one evening as they sat on the deck watching the sunset. A rare direct question about feelings Dom had been careful not to impose on either child. "I miss who I thought she was," Dom answered honestly. "The partner I believed I had. But that person never truly existed. She was a projection of what Vivian wanted me to see." "Do you hate her?" Lena pressed, her perceptiveness zeroing in on the emotional core Dom rarely exposed. Dom considered the question carefully. "Hate requires emotional investment I'm not willing to make. What I feel is clarity, understanding that the relationship was based on fundamental misperception and making decisions accordingly." While the children processed their complex emotions about their mother, Dom focused on building the framework for their future, establishing legitimate business operations through his security consulting firm, now restructured to emphasize corporate ethics and accountability systems. The irony wasn't lost on him. His expertise in identifying vulnerabilities and penetrating defenses, once applied to dismantling the Palmer Empire, now generated significant income helping other organizations prevent similar corruption. 9 months after their relocation to Oregon, as the family settled into something approximating normal life, Dom received information that required another difficult conversation with the children. Vivian, while awaiting appeal proceedings at a federal facility, had attempted to establish contact through an intermediary, a former law colleague not directly implicated in the Palmer crimes. "She wants to apologize," Dom explained during a family dinner, presenting the information without editorial comment. "Her representative says she's undergone significant reflection and wants to make amends, particularly with you both." Maddox's response was immediate and unequivocal. "No, never." Lena, characteristically more measured, asked, "Do you think she's sincere?" "I think she's desperate," Dom replied honestly. "The appeals process isn't proceeding as her attorneys hoped. This may be tactical rather than genuine, an attempt to demonstrate remorse that could influence sentencing reviews. Or maybe she really is sorry," Lena suggested, her capacity for empathy sometimes concerning Dom with its potential for exploitation. "That's possible," Dom acknowledged. "People sometimes achieve genuine insight through consequences. But intention matters less than impact in this situation. The question isn't whether she's sincere, but whether contact would benefit you both." "It wouldn't," Maddox stated flatly. "Nothing she could say would change what she did." "I might want to someday," Lena said quietly. "Not now, but maybe when I'm older." Dom nodded, respecting both perspectives. "That's your decision to make, individually and on your own timeline. I won't influence it either way." This measured approach to the children's relationship with their mother reflected Dom's evolved understanding of his role, not to direct their emotional responses, but to provide the security and stability they needed to develop their own authentic perspectives. The intermediary was informed that neither child wished for contact at present, though Lena might reconsider an unspecified future date. No further attempts at communication came from Vivian directly, though Dom's intelligence network reported she had commissioned a detailed psychological assessment of both children, presumably preparation for eventual contact, or perhaps another legal maneuver. As the one-year anniversary of their Oregon relocation approached, Dom initiated what he considered the final phase of the transition from crisis to stability. The property, initially selected primarily for security considerations, was modified to reflect more permanent residence. Landscaping that balanced beauty with maintained sightlines, renovations that incorporated the children's evolving interests, community connections carefully established with selected neighbors and local institutions. "We're not running anymore," he explained when Maddox questioned certain security protocol relaxations. "We're establishing. Different strategic objectives require different operational parameters. In normal person speak?" Maddox requested with a hint of humor that had gradually re-emerged as stability increased. "We're putting down roots," Dom clarified. "Making this home, not just a secure location." The process wasn't without challenges. Both children experienced adjustment difficulties in their new school, their unusual background and hypervigilant tendencies sometimes creating social barriers. Dom addressed these issues with characteristic directness, arranging appropriate support resources while maintaining clear expectations for resilience. Different doesn't mean damaged, he reminded Lena after a particularly difficult day when classmates had asked probing questions about her mother's criminal case. Your experiences have given you perspective most people never develop. That's an advantage if you choose to view it that way. For Dom personally, the transition from tactician to father rebuilding a family required its own adjustments. The hypervigilance that had kept them safe during the acute crisis sometimes manifested as excessive control in normal situations. The tactical thinking that had outmaneuvered the Palmer resources occasionally translated to unnecessary complexity in routine decisions. He addressed these tendencies with the same disciplined self-awareness he'd applied throughout his military and security career, identifying patterns, implementing corrections, measuring results. The objective remained consistent, providing the stability and security his children needed while allowing them the freedom to develop their own identities beyond the shadow of the Palmer legacy. 14 months after Vivian's arrest, as life had settled into sustainable patterns, Dom received information that would trigger the final chapter in the Palmer saga. Through his intelligence network, he learned that Elizabeth Palmer had retained investigators to locate certain financial documentation believed lost in the chaos of the family's collapse. Specifically, records related to offshore holdings Carlyle had established decades earlier. The timing suggested coordination with Vivian's legal team, possibly preparation for new appeals based on previously undisclosed financial information. Dom's sources indicated Elizabeth had discovered the existence of a safety deposit box in Zurich, accessible only to Palmer family members, that potentially contained the documentation she sought. For Dom, this development represented not a direct threat, but a potential disruption to the stability he had established. If previously hidden Palmer assets emerged, the legal proceedings could extend indefinitely, keeping the children tethered to the past he was determined they should transcend. After careful consideration, Dom decided on a final definitive action to close this chapter permanently. Using contacts established during his security consulting career, he arranged a brief, untracked trip to Switzerland, informing the children he needed to address international business matters that couldn't be handled remotely. In Zurich, Dom leveraged identification methods developed during his intelligence-gathering operations against the Palmer Empire to access the safety deposit box Elizabeth had identified. Inside, he found exactly what his sources had suggested: documentation for financial structures established by Carlyle decades earlier, designed to remain undetectable even to experienced forensic accountants. The assets represented were substantial, not the billions of the known Palmer holdings, but significant enough to potentially fund a multi-generational restoration of Palmer influence if properly leveraged. More concerning was the evidence of political connections even deeper than those already exposed, relationships that, if publicly revealed, would destabilize institutions beyond just the financial sector. Dom faced a decision point that would define the final resolution of the Palmer legacy. The tactical operator in him recognized the potential value of this information, both as leverage and as insurance against future threats. The father in him understood that true closure required not just winning the immediate battle, but preventing future wars. After documenting the contents thoroughly, creating redundant records secured through his most trusted contacts, Dom arranged for the original materials to be delivered directly to federal investigators, accompanied by a detailed statement providing context and connections to existing criminal cases. This action effectively closed the final avenue for Palmer resurgence, ensuring any remaining assets will be processed through legal channels rather than manipulated through hidden structures. It also removed Dom himself from the equation, placing the information in official hands rather than maintaining it as personal leverage. Upon returning to Oregon, Dom found the children engaged in their normal activities. Maddox preparing for a regional martial arts competition, Lena designing experiments for a marine science project. Their lives had acquired the rhythm and purpose that had been the ultimate objective of everything Dom had done since discovering Vivian's betrayal. That evening, as they ate dinner on the deck overlooking the Pacific, Dom recognized an opportunity for closure that transcended legal proceedings and financial settlements. "I want to ask you both something important," he began, setting aside his usual reserve about family emotions. "After everything that's happened, everything we've been through, are you happy here? Not just safe, not just stable, but actually happy?" The question caught them by surprise. Dom's focus had always been primarily on security and development, with happiness considered a potential byproduct rather than a direct objective. Maddox considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "I'm content," he said finally. "I don't think about the past as much. I have goals now, things I want to achieve that have nothing to do with all that." Lena's answer came more readily. "I'm happy when I'm working at the research center, when we're here together like this. I still have bad days when I think about Mom, but they're getting less frequent." Dom absorbed their responses, measuring them against his own definition of success. Not perfect happiness, that was never the realistic goal, but functional wholeness. The ability to acknowledge the past without being defined by it. The capacity to build future aspirations independent of trauma responses. "There's one more thing I've been considering," he continued. "A change I wanted your input on before proceeding." The children looked at him expectantly, accustomed to Dom's careful deliberation before major decisions. "I've been thinking about our name," he said simply. "Not changing it entirely, but modifying it. Creating something that acknowledges our history while establishing our own identity going forward." The proposal sparked immediate interest. Names had significance beyond mere identification. They carried legacy, connection, expectation. The Russo name linked them to Dom's heritage of discipline and protection. The Palmer name, which neither child had taken but which influenced how the world perceived them, carried the weight of both privilege and corruption. "Something new," Maddox clarified. "Not Russo or Palmer. A variation of Russo," Dom explained. "Modified to represent who we are now, not just who we came from." The conversation that followed reflected how far they had come as a family unit. Thoughtful exchange of perspectives, genuine consideration of implications, mutual respect for different viewpoints. By the end of the evening, they had reached consensus on a modification that honored Dom's family heritage while symbolizing their new beginning. The legal process of implementing this change became the final formal action in separating from the Palmer legacy. Not rejection or denial of history, but integration and transformation, exactly the process Dom had worked to facilitate for the children psychologically. Chapter 9. Phoenix Protocol. 5 years after the collapse of the Palmer Empire, the family that had once been its potential heirs had transformed so completely that few connections remained visible to the outside world. The modified surname, Rossano, had become established through legitimate business registrations, academic achievements, and community integration. The coastal Oregon property had evolved from tactical retreat to genuine home, its security measures sophisticated but unobtrusive. Dom, now approaching 50, had redirected his security expertise towards specialized consulting for organizations focused on corporate accountability and ethics enforcement. The irony of his career evolution wasn't lost on him. The same skills he had once used to dismantle corruption now generated substantial income, helping prevent it. His reputation in these circles was built not on his connection to the Palmer case, which many younger clients didn't even recognize, but on his methodical effectiveness and uncompromising standards. Maddox, at 21, had developed into a focused young man with his father's tactical precision and a moral clarity forged through adversity. Completing his third year at Stanford with dual concentrations in international relations and cybersecurity, he had established himself as a formidable academic talent while maintaining the physical discipline ingrained through years of martial arts training. Lena, 19 and in her second year at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, had channeled her perceptiveness into scientific inquiry, specializing in marine ecosystems with an emerging focus on resilience in damaged habitats. Her childhood tendency toward hypervigilance had evolved into exceptional observational skills, making her a natural researcher. Both children maintained the security awareness Dom had instilled, but now balanced it with normal young adult development. Maddox dating a classmate whose father happened to be former military intelligence. A coincidence Dom had verified with characteristic thoroughness. Lena dividing her time between research projects and a close circle of equally dedicated science students. The annual family gathering at the Oregon property had become tradition. A week in summer, when both children returned home, maintaining connections despite increasingly independent lives. Dom, who had once structured these gatherings, now allowed them to unfold with the natural rhythm of a family comfortable in each other's presence. During one such gathering, as they hiked familiar coastal trails, Maddox broached a subject that had remained largely untouched for years. "I got a letter from Mom," he said without preamble, maintaining the direct communication style he'd inherited from Dom. Forwarded through Stanford's administrative office. Dom absorbed this information without visible reaction, though internally he noted that Vivian's persistence had outlasted his expectations. 3 years into her sentence, following multiple failed appeals, she had apparently found means to circumvent the communication boundaries established by both Dom and the children themselves. "What did it say?" he asked, neither encouraging nor discouraging Maddox's disclosure. "Mostly what you'd expect. She's changed, found religion, wants forgiveness." Maddox's tone remained neutral, analytical rather than emotional. "Says she accepts responsibility now, understands why what she did was wrong." "And do you believe her?" Dom asked, genuinely curious about his son's assessment. Maddox considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "I believe she believes it. Whether that constitutes actual change is a different question." "Are you planning to respond?" Dom maintained his long-standing position that the children's relationship with their mother was theirs to determine, requiring neither his permission nor his approval. "No." Maddox's decision was firm. What she did wasn't just wrong, it was revealing. It showed who she truly was when pressured, someone willing to sacrifice her children for family legacy and financial security. Lena, walking slightly ahead on the trail, turned back toward them. "I got one too. Different content, same objective." Dom nodded, unsurprised that Vivian would tailor her approach to each child's known tendencies. "And your thoughts?" "I've been studying ecosystem collapse," Lena replied with the tangential approach that often preceded her most insightful observations. "When habitats are destroyed beyond certain thresholds, no amount of restoration effort can recreate what existed before. You can only establish something new that acknowledges the damage as part of its foundation." The analogy wasn't lost on either Dom or Maddox. Vivian's actions had crossed thresholds that made traditional restoration of relationship impossible. Not because forgiveness was inconceivable, but because trust had been fundamentally compromised beyond structural repair. "I wrote back," Lena continued, surprising both her father and brother. "Not with forgiveness. I'm not there, might never be, but with acknowledgement that I received her letter, that I understand she believes she's changed." Dom studied his daughter with quiet pride. Her capacity to engage with complexity while maintaining clear boundaries reflected maturity beyond her years. "That was your choice to make," he said simply, "as is whatever comes next." The conversation shifted to other topics as they continued their hike, but Dom recognized its significance in the longer arc of healing. Both children had developed the capacity to engage with their mother's legacy not from positions of trauma response, but from centered self-awareness. Exactly the outcome he had worked toward through years of careful support. Later that evening, as they gathered on the deck overlooking the Pacific, Dom shared information he had been considering for several weeks. "I've been approached about a position with an international accountability organization," he explained, "coordinating security for investigators who document corporate and governmental abuses in developing regions." "Sounds dangerous," Maddox observed, immediately identifying the operational implications. "Calculated risk," Dom acknowledged, "but meaningful work." "You're asking our permission?" Lena's perception, as always, cut straight to underlying dynamics. "Not permission," Dom clarified, "but your perspectives matter. This would involve significant international travel, extended periods away from home, a meaningful change to our established patterns." What remained unspoken, but understood, was that Dom had structured his entire life around availability to his children for the past 7 years. Every decision, from security protocols to business development, had been filtered through the primary objective of providing stability and protection. This potential change represented not just professional evolution, but a fundamental shift in family dynamics. "We're not kids anymore, Dad," Maddox pointed out with practical directness. "We have our own lives, our own security protocols. You deserve the same." "I think you should do it," Lena added. "You've always been most fulfilled when protecting those who need it. That's who you are." Dom absorbed their perspectives with the careful consideration he applied to all strategic information. What they were offering wasn't just approval for a career move, but release from the hyper-focused protective role that had defined his identity since discovering Vivian's betrayal. The recognition both humbled and liberated him. The conversation evolved into practical planning, communication protocols during international deployments, security measures for the Oregon property during extended absences, contingency procedures for various scenarios. The familiar territory of tactical preparation provided comfortable framework for what was essentially an emotional transition. Dom stepping fully into his own life again, while the children continued establishing theirs. 2 months later, as Dom prepared for his first extended international assignment with the Accountability Organization, he received information that brought the Palmer chapter full circle. Through his still-maintained intelligence network, he learned that Vivian had been diagnosed with aggressive cancer, her prognosis measured in months rather than years. The news presented a final decision point regarding the Palmer legacy. Dom's immediate tactical assessment identified multiple approaches, from completely shielding the children from this information to facilitating direct contact before opportunity was lost. His evolved understanding of his role, however, led him to the only appropriate response, providing the information without directive or manipulation. He shared the news with both children through individual conversations, tailored to their communication preferences. Maddox, away at Stanford, received a direct video call with the medical details presented clearly. Lena, between research voyages at Scripps, received the same information with additional context about treatment options being pursued. Neither responded with immediate decisions about contact, exactly as Dom had expected. Each would process the information according to their own internal frameworks, reaching conclusions authentic to their individual relationships with their mother rather than influenced by external expectations. Dom's own response to Vivian's illness surprised him with its clarity. The tactical operator who had systematically dismantled the Palmer empire felt neither satisfaction nor pity. The husband who had once loved her experienced neither vindication nor grief. What remained was simply acknowledgement of a complex human who had made destructive choices with far-reaching consequences, now facing the most fundamental consequence of all. 3 weeks before Dom's scheduled departure for his international assignment, Lena called with her decision. She would visit Vivian at the medical facility where she was receiving treatment, not with expectations of reconciliation, but with willingness to provide human connection during final stages. Maddox, maintaining his position of complete separation, supported his sister's choice while declining to participate himself. Dom, recognizing the significance of Lena's decision, offered to accompany her, not to influence the interaction, but to provide support before and after. His daughter's response reflected her growth into adult independence. "I need to do this myself," she explained. "Not as a Palmer, not as your daughter, but as myself. As Lena Rossano, making my own choice about closure." When Lena returned from the visit, she shared only what she felt necessary. That Vivian was indeed failing rapidly, that their conversation had been brief but substantive, that no dramatic reconciliation had occurred, but mutual acknowledgement had been possible. Dom respected her boundaries, neither pressing for details nor offering interpretation of the experience. Vivian Palmer died 6 weeks later, while Dom was deployed in Southeast Asia, documenting security protocols for investigators tracking labor abuses. The notice came through Leona, who had maintained certain monitoring functions even as the Palmer case receded into legal history. Dom arranged immediate communication with both children, assessing their needs remotely through secure channels. Maddox, characteristically, processed the news with analytical detachment, acknowledging the significance while maintaining emotional boundaries long since established. Lena experienced more complex responses, not grief for the mother she had lost years earlier through betrayal, but recognition of the finality that death imposed on any potential future healing. When Dom returned from his assignment 3 weeks later, the family gathered at the Oregon property for what he recognized as the true conclusion of the Palmer chapter. Not to mourn Vivian, that relationship had been processed years earlier, but to acknowledge the definitive closure her death represented. As they sat together on the cliff overlooking the Pacific, watching sunlight transform the water into hammered gold, Dom reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the brutal confrontation at the Palmer reunion to the systematic dismantling of a corrupt empire. From tactical operations driven by righteous fury to the measured reconstruction of family built on truth rather than obligation. To closure, he said simply, raising his glass in the only acknowledgement of Vivian's passing any of them required. To moving forward, Maddox added, his expression reflecting not happiness exactly, but settled purpose. To who we've become, Lena completed her scientific finding the most accurate assessment of their collective journey. The sun continued its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in colors no Palmer painting had ever captured despite generations of collected art. Dom watched his children, now adults with lives of their own, and recognized the completion of his most important mission. Not vengeance, though that had been necessary. Not protection, though that had been foundational. But transformation, the systematic replacement of corruption with integrity, manipulation with honesty, obligation with choice. The Palmer bloodline continued through Maddox and Lena, but the Palmer legacy of appearance over substance, power over principle, had been definitively broken. In its place stood something entirely new, a family defined not by inheritance or name, but by conscious choice and earned trust. As darkness settled over the Pacific, Dom Rossano, once Dominic Russo, briefly the destroyer of the Palmer Empire, now simply a father who had fulfilled his most sacred duty, felt neither triumph nor regret, only completion. The mission was accomplished. The future belonged to what they would build next. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.